Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so for the next few weeks, I'm going to be in the process of moving out to Columbus, right? So the schedule's going to be kind of finicky. I figured instead of just like taking huge portions of time off, right? Just like missing out for a whole week, different things like that. We kind of record a whole bunch of stuff ahead of time. And this week we're going to cover the original Secret Wars from 1984 because this story is amazing. So the original Secret Wars, a lot of you guys know about this because we've talked about it before, right? It's one of these things that we've mentioned a whole bunch of times before, but never actually covered. So this story is really, really awesome because what this does is this initially picks up really with the heroes, right? Just kind of floating out in space on this fortress. Now, an important thing to understand here is the heroes didn't come here of their own accord, right? It's not like they were all sitting on Earth and they were like, let's all go to space, you know, and they all went out there. Instead, they were just suddenly transported here, right? In the middle of whatever it was that they were doing, they were suddenly yanked away and transported to this location. And the result is that all of them are basically trying to figure out what's going on. Now, on the other side of the equation are all the villains who have been transported to a singular location, which includes Galactus, Dr. Doom, Ultron, different things like that. Now, a little bit of history here. The reason why this was done and the reason why these particular characters were brought here is because of the fact that in some form or fashion, either they proved to be the most popular or they were the most marketable. And the reason why that matters is because editor-in-chief Jim Shooter was trying to work out a toy deal with Mattel, and Mattel said the only way we would do it is if you made a story around the marketing ploy, and that's where Marvel Secret Wars comes from, right? Marvel Superhero Secret Wars is the actual name of the story, but that's where it comes from. These characters were essentially the most marketable, or at least could be the most interesting depending on how the story was being done. The other half of this is that some writers would allow their characters to be used, right? Because editors seem to have a lot more control back then. Now, in the face of Jim Shooter, that's kind of a hard pill to swallow because guy was kind of a dick. But nonetheless, the funny thing about this is that right off the bat, amongst all the heroes is Magneto. Now, this is a funny thing here because technically Magneto didn't really become a reformed hero until 1985, and this story started in 1984. And Uncanny X-Men issue number 200, that's when you got the trial of Magneto, and that's when he basically repented for all the things that he did, really kind of offered himself up and said, hey, look, like I'm going to allow myself to be put on trial for the things that I've done. And then during that story, ended up taking up leadership of the Uncanny X-Men and the New Mutants, right? But that wouldn't happen until a little while after the story originally started. And a lot of people have kind of surmised that the reason why this was done was because it would just sort of segue in, right? So if Magneto was going to be a good guy in less than a year, and people who are going to be buying the toys expected to buy the toys of a good guy, then it made sense to basically market the story in such a way to where Magneto would be a good guy in this story, so that when the story finished and the toys came out, people would be buying the toys of a good guy instead of a villain, right? That's a lot of people kind of surmise that's the reason why, and it sort of makes sense, but it's one of these moments where at the moment right now, Magneto is really kind of a villain, right? He's really kind of a bad guy here. Now, the crazy thing about this is that while everybody is watching, you know, while they're all kind of bickering and they're sort of debating amongst each other, suddenly, like, in the entire galaxy they're in, and I kid you not, the entire galaxy they're in just gets wiped away, right? It's like a broom going over a whole bunch of dirt. It all just gets wiped away, completely wiped clean, leaving nothing but them. And then in turn, all these chunks, all these huge portions of the universe basically suddenly coalesce into this singular planet. Now, it gets kind of crazy from there because from that point going forward, suddenly Ultron loses his mind because Ultron's just kind of sitting there like, I am Ultron. I don't understand what's going on here, but it doesn't matter. My job is to kill all of you. So like, Ultron's going to destroy you all. Now, first thing that happens when Ultron goes on his attack is Dr. Doom immediately goes to the Molecule Man Owen Reese, and he's like, you're the only one of us that has power enough. You and Galactus are the only ones powerful enough to defeat Ultron. And that's true because remember, at this point in time, Ultron's basically been reconstituted, right? He was essentially defeated up until this point, and that was kind of the nature of Secret Wars is suddenly Ultron pops back up, but he has an adamantium suit, right? He has like an adamantium armor that he wears. That's what his body's made out of. And like everybody kind of starts panicking, right? Well, then like that's when we get into the namesake of the video, Galactus versus Ultron, because in the middle of all this, Ultron basically bumps into Galactus. Galactus lifts him into the air, siphons all the energy out of him, and Ultron's dead. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, but Ultron is incinerated right off the bat. Now, of course, this catches everybody off guard, right? Like all the villains are totally surprised, but with Galactus just snuffing him out like that, people are just like, wow, like it's crazy. And it was really kind of Jim Shooter's way of saying this is the power Ultron possesses, right? Because this story came out at a time when Ultron was still pretty hot to trot, and so far as he was a popular character, people liked him, they were reading about him consistently, and he appeared a lot more often than he does these days. But following the destruction of Ultron, insofar as his energies were absorbed by Galactus, and so it's just an empty husk that used to be his body, then suddenly like the heavens quite literally open up, and this voice just kind of comes comes out of nowhere. Right now, this is one of the most iconic lines from the history of Marvel. I am from beyond, slay your enemies, and all you desire shall be yours. Nothing you dream of is impossible for me to accomplish. Done. That's the opening line of the Beyonder. That's the first time you hear from him. And in fact, it'll be the last time you hear from him from quite some time. But the funny thing is that as soon as that happens, Galactus immediately takes off to access the Beyonder itself and say, you can cure my desire to consume energies of various life-sustaining planets. And as soon as he gets up there, he's immediately just kind of batted away alongside Doctor Doom, who of course is following Galactus to try to figure out what's going on with the Beyonder himself. Now again, this was a huge moment, right? And you guys who are familiar with comics know this is a huge moment. Galactus is no small thing, right? Galactus consumes planets. The guy can create life, destroy life. The guy can do virtually anything, right? So long as he has the energy to do it. And to see him just kind of swatted away by some energy source out there is massive, because it's almost like Captain America just being hit by the Incredible Hulk, like being hit by like Worldbreaker Hulk, right? Just being swatted away and sent flying. Because it's not like Galactus stutters back and is like, man, that was a really hard punch. No, he's totally like unconscious, right? He was knocked out cold. And that's kind of a crazy thing to see happening. Now, following that, everybody's basically immediately transported to Battleworld. And this is when things basically start to pop off. Because what you have, and it's kind of interesting that you get it, what you have is the infighting among the heroes. And you wouldn't expect that, right? You would expect that heroes would be like, okay guys, let's get to work. Like let's do what heroes do the hero thing. But right off the bat, they're just like, why is Magneto here? Because he's a dick and he's a bad guy. Like that's the immediate response of all the heroes. And it's kind of funny because they don't initially go to attack him. I mean, they kind of question him a little bit, but they don't initially go to attack him. And instead, he's just kind of like, okay, so like, I'm done with this, right? He basically declares non-neutrality and leaves. Now, something else that I want to point out here is a character that's going to become important in the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And this is Monica Rambeau, also known as Spectrum. Now, at the time of this comic, she's known as Captain Marvel, the second person to don the name of Captain Marvel, but Spectrum was super powerful. Now, the funny thing about this is that for all the vaunted ability she had, she wasn't nearly as powerful as she would become, right? During Al Ewing's Ultimates, when she was working alongside Black Panther, Blue Marvel, Carol Danvers, and those characters, Blue Marvel basically analyzed her and was like, you're a being made of pure energy. You can basically tap into any energy source in existence. You're godlike in terms of your abilities. It was kind of nuts, right? Now, she alongside a lot of other characters are just going to kind of be here, right? She's going to kind of get equal time among everybody else. And that was the important thing to understand when it came to Secret Wars. There was no real standout star here, right? The only real standout stars were the characters who were super popular, more popular than others because of their publication history, right? So the Incredible Hulk, the Fantastic Four, Wolverine of the X-Men, Spider-Man, different things like that. But it wasn't like Marvel Superhero Secret Wars featuring Spider-Man and everybody else, right? It wasn't really like that, right? You know, it wasn't like Spider-Man and Friends or anything along those lines. But it's kind of a cool thing that goes on here because right after, you know, Magneto basically takes off, then the question becomes who's going to lead the pack, right? And you've got some heavy hitters here. You've got Colossus, you've got Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four, and normally you would expect Reed Richards, right? Right off the bat, he's the most intelligent of everybody here, including the villains themselves outside of Galactus. But Reed's response is like, my family's back on Earth, right? So my mind is not really concerned with what's going on here right now. It's concerned with my family, as any family man's mind should be. And so from there, the questions kind of start bouncing around, right? I mean, initially Wasp is like, well, I'm leader of the Avengers, which technically she was, but she deferred to Captain America, who in turn deferred to Charles Xavier. But the response to this is like, Captain America's the guy to pick, right? Because of his courage, because of the fact that he's the natural leader. And so ultimately, Captain America becomes the leader of the heroes. And so it gets kind of nuts because following that, Doctor Doom basically travels to this citadel that he sees off in the distance where all the villains are hanging out. And as soon as he gets there, he gets pissed, right? Because like he shows up there and he's like, okay guys, so like we're gonna steal the power of the Beyonder. And they're like, but why though? Like we should defeat the heroes. And they're like, we can have anything we want. And he's just like, you fools, like you can have anything you want from him, or you can take his power and then have anything you want forever. So like we should take his power. And they're like, no man, we're gonna fight the heroes. So he's like, you're all idiots. So he literally collapses part of the building and then leaves them there and then goes to take off in a jet. And then of course Kane the Conqueror shoots him down. Now when Doctor Doom's jet comes crashing down, in turn all the various heroes start to go and investigate. Now this is kind of a cool thing because when that happens, the superheroes end up arriving in the exact same spot where the villains are, and you get the first real skirmish of Secret Wars between the heroes and the villains. Now the funny thing about this is that it happens pretty quickly, but not all the villains are defeated, right? The Incredible Hulk is lifting up these enormous chunks of rock and it's just like boom, just like throwing them at people, right? So it's kind of bonkers to see all that go down. You've got Reed Richards and company stepping up, but for the most part these villains are some pretty heavy hitters, right? You got the Absorbing Man, Crusher Creel. Crusher Creel is one of those unsung heroes of Marvel Comics, right? Not in so far as he's a good guy, but in so far as he's just underrated and underappreciated. He could decimate all dude. He would take all comers. Like have Crusher Creel just like absorb adamantium, right? Because his skin turns into whatever substance he absorbs, right? So have him absorb like Uru metal or adamantium or something like that, and he could annihilate everybody. Like it would be believable for Marvel to create a story where the Absorbing Man kills all the superheroes on Earth. That's entirely possible. But the fact remains here that the first thing Doctor Doom does after defeating the various villains is go to try to find Galactus, right? Because for the most part, their motivations really kind of align. Doctor Doom wants to seek the power of the Beyonder for his own ends, right? So he can just make himself all powerful. Because if you remember Doctor Doom from back in the day, for those of you guys who really recall, pretty much Doctor Doom, anytime before Secret Wars 2015, his idea was to constantly covet power. It was the only thing that really mattered to him. Galactus wants to covet power for the purpose, or wants to covet the power of the Beyonder for the purpose of satiating his desire to consume worlds, right? He hates doing it. That's one of the important things to understand, is this is one of those themes that really held strong after the trial of Reed Richards, right? Where we learned the true nature of Galactus, that Galactus mirrors whatever race is looking at him. But that story also established the idea that Galactus is a necessity. He has to exist. He's a cosmic constant. And so because of that, like, it's the role he plays in the universe, even though he absolutely despises it, right? It's not like Galactus is like hopping and skipping around like, I'm gonna consume this life-sustaining world. Yeah! Like, there's really more of him just kind of playing the role that he plays. But despite the fact that both of their motivations kind of seem to be intact, when Doctor Doom goes to try to get Galactus to notice him, Galactus blows him off. Now, Galactus isn't doing this because of the fact that he realizes the true motivations of Doctor Doom. Galactus is doing this because it's Galactus, right? Like, for the most part, he doesn't care about the ongoings of various individuals out there. Pretty much all the individuals who were out there in the universe, none of them really matter. You know, there are instances when a person catches the attention of Galactus. Normally, he wouldn't care about Reed Richards, but Reed Richards caught Galactus' attention because when he first showed up to Earth to consume it, Reed used the ultimate nullifier and threatened to annihilate Galactus out of existence, right? And so, like, taking a step like that and challenging a being of that level led to Galactus kind of taking note of Reed and then realizing how smart he was, and then saying, okay, so like, this is a guy that I need to kind of keep in the back of my mind and really like take seriously, right? Offer some respect to. Now from there, you basically have Doctor Doom, who returns to the undestroyed citadel of the villains while they're out fighting the various heroes, and then in turn discovers the body of Ultron basically just laying there. And so when he does, he basically says, okay, I can use this thing for my own ends, right? I can use this body for my own individual purposes insofar as reactivating Ultron and then reprogramming him to basically serve for me. And that's a very important thing. You know, reactivating Ultron, reprogramming him, and making Ultron serve Doom is a huge thing, because you're talking about, again, a pretty powerful being that's not going to deviate, right? That's one of the important things to understand about Ultron is a servant to his programming. Now, with the various villains who were taken out, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like the Enchantress from Asgard and, you know, Dr. Octopus and a few others here and there, they're basically taken out. And it's not really the biggest thing ever. I mean, they're kind of incapacitated, but in the midst of all this, the heroes end up coming across a citadel that they discover that's basically totally unoccupied that they make their own. And this citadel is really going to serve a couple purposes. One, it's going to be the base of operations for the heroes, and then two, it'll be a place where they can store the villains that they've captured. So at this point, we've got two bases of operations, one that Doctor Doom is using for the villains and one the heroes are using for their own. Now, from here, you actually go into a little bit of a reprieve, and this is one of the reasons why Jim Shooter's writing style was so good, is because despite the fact that the guy was basically a dick, his writing style was such that it was very, very nuanced, right? So it's not like you see with writing today, where it's like just a sequence of events, right? So like this thing happens, and then this thing happens, and then this thing happens, and then this thing happens, and the story's done. It doesn't really work that way. Instead, what you got back then was you got this thing happens, now let's see what the characters are focusing on after it happened. And then that thing happens, and now let's see what the characters are focusing on after that thing happened, right? So you kind of got like this full-on story, as opposed to like jump cuts over the course of a singular story, which is really what you get a lot today. Now, what Captain America really does here is kind of call a meeting and say, okay, so the next course of action is to essentially track down the various other villains who have escaped and then round them up. We need to capture them and then figure out what we do next, right? Now from there, of course, Magneto ends up discovering his own citadel, his own base of operations. What his grand scheme is, we don't fully know. But what we end up doing is jumping back to Doctor Doom when the rest of the villains show up, right? So Absorbing Man and Molecule Man and so on and so forth. And it was actually Dr. Octopus who's with them. It was my mistake he wasn't captured by the heroes. But in turn, one of the funny things kind of goes on here is that where Doctor Doom brings out Ultron and basically says, Ultron's on my side, either you guys can ally with me or Ultron will destroy you. Of course, they ally with Doctor Doom, but he immediately cozies up to Molecule Man. He basically says, you know, Molecule Man, and then he refers to him as Mr. Reese, which is something you would never hear Doctor Doom do. I refer to somebody as Mr. something. You know, Doctor Doom's very, very haughty and very, very full of hubris. So he's always kind of like, you know, you are beneath me. He would never treat someone like an equal, or even go far as to treat somebody with any real measure of respect. That's not really what he does, you know? And so he basically says, you know, I trust that you are not inconvenienced by all this. You know, I have prepared a special chamber for you. I hope you like it. Basically, I'm catering to all your various needs. And it's kind of funny because what Jim Shooter does is kind of give us this little tease of what the Molecule Man can do, right? He says, well, being the absolute master of molecules, I can just assimilate molecules whenever I want, right? So I never have to eat. I never really get hungry or anything like that. If I get dirty, I can manipulate molecules so I just become clean. Like I don't have to worry about washing clothes or anything like that. And so it's like these small small little things where it's like everything that Molecule Man can do, even on the most nuanced and fine level, nothing's beyond him, right? He can do pretty much anything he wants to by controlling molecules. Now again, the idea of Molecule Man controlling molecules is a misnomer. He controls the atomic structure and the subatomic particles of matter. That's what he does, right? He doesn't really control molecules. He controls matter all the way down to the subatomic level, which is how he's able to do the kind of things that he can do, right? If he was able to quote unquote control molecules and he could not control atoms, then like he can control the elements, right? So he can make water go to different things or change water shape because he can manipulate the molecules of H2O, right? Like 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen atom, but he couldn't manipulate the individual atoms of hydrogen and oxygen and separate water, right? If he was truly the Molecule Man, that would be the case, but he's more like the subatomic man, but Molecule Man just sounds better, right? Alliteration, Stanley and them were all about that back in the 1960s. And so in response to this, what ends up happening here is of course Magneto, for whatever plan that he has, ends up traveling to the base of the heroes and then basically traveling to its power core. Now, in the middle of all that, what you also get are these cool little moments, right? You basically have Wasp and you have She-Hulk, who were talking about some of the heroes who were left behind, kind of having this conversation of like, man, I was supposed to be doing this. And you've got this really cool thing where you have Cyclops and Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four having a conversation about their families. And you never really see these two converse. They kind of used to back in the day insofar as it's like, you know, hey, Fantastic Four, some popping off. Can you come and help us? Like that was basically all you really got. But what you kind of get this cool reprieve where they're talking about their lives and they're talking about these kind of things that were supposed to be going on, you know, like Cyclops and you had Jean who were like out doing their thing. Actually, although at the time that I think about this, I think it was Madeline Pryor. Now that I think about this, I don't think it was Jean Grey. I think it was Madeline Pryor. But they were basically out doing their thing, you know, and it was kind of like, I was cheated of that great moment by just being yanked to this location, just being like, you know, brought to this place, whatever this happens to be. It's kind of lamenting their fate to a degree, you know, in terms of what's going on. And so as a result of that, you also have, you have Ben Grimm, who really just sort of listens to Cyclops and Reed Richards having their conversation. And a couple things go on here. The first thing is he basically laments not being able to be human. But the other part is he's afraid that he'll never see Alicia Masters again, and then kind of goes on to say, well, maybe it's better off for her, right? Maybe it's better for her not to see me again, that kind of a thing. That was one of the natures of Ben Grimm back in the day when it came to like his life of not really being human. That was kind of the nature of his character, kind of feeling bad for himself all the time instead of just trying to find a way to fix this problem. There's one point where Franklin Richards ages himself up into an adult and doesn't really know what's going on. He kind of starts to panic and like basically everybody but Susan Storm is defeated. And then once the story comes to an end, you end up learning it's Franklin and that he has like these insane powers, and then Franklin kind of comes to and is like, okay, so I can do pretty much anything. And then like he scanned the mind of Ben Grimm and he was like, hey Reed, should I turn Ben Grimm back into being human? And Reed's like, no man, he's better off that way. And it's like, what a dick. Like, dude, that's like the crappiest thing ever. Like, hey dad, so like, can I do this thing that will make Ben Grimm happier than he's ever been and will give him everything he wants in this life? And Reed's like, no man, he needs to suffer because he's my friend and that's what friends do. And it's like, what a jerk, man. But of course, in the middle of everybody kind of talking and sort of reminiscing and having these conversations, Spider-Man's spider sense kicks off. And that basically leads him directly to where it is Magneto's at, insofar as Magneto's at their base of operations. Now, of course, again, Magneto and the heroes sort of ended on not necessarily ambiguous, but kind of non-allied terms, right? It was kind of like, okay, so like you stay away, we stay away. That was kind of the alliance or the kind of agreement they had, right? And so because of that, not really knowing what Magneto's motivations are, and with Magneto's motivations not really even being provided here, what is going on is he basically immediately takes out all the superheroes. And this was really Jim Shooter just being like, this is the power of Magneto. And that's the important thing to understand, right? Ever since the Stanley and Jack Kirby era, with the introduction of Eric Lenscher, he's always been displayed as a character who could take on pretty much all the superheroes in some form or fashion. Now, in this instance, it's just taking all the machinery and crashing it down onto them. But that's true, right? I mean, that's kind of the nature of it. We've seen Magneto take control of Captain America's shield. We've seen him stop Thor's hammer dead in its tracks. We've seen different things like that, right? We've seen him really just kind of like use his power of magnetism in a variety of different ways to overcome a multitude of different characters. And so in response to that, of course, he basically kidnaps the Wasp, takes her with him, and then where Ben Grimm goes to chase after, suddenly he's modified and he turns back into being human. But before anybody can ask any questions in terms of what's going on, they in turn are brought to this kind of monitoring room where they begin to realize that much more important things are at play. You've got Galactus standing on a hillside, and all indications point to the idea that Galactus is constructing one of his devices that's going to consume worlds, right? So he intends to destroy Battleworld. And so it really kind of sends people into a panic, right? Because if that's the case, Galactus is basically going to kill them all. Okay, so we are getting back into the thick of things with Secret Wars Part 2. Okay, so this is when things get kind of cool. This is one of the reasons why Secret Wars was so awesome. It was one of these landmark stories that came out for a bunch of different reasons. One of the big reasons is because it answers questions like, if Spider-Man fought this character, who would win, right? And it would more often than not be Spider-Man, unless you're talking about a telepath or a reality warper, and we'll see why in this video. But then it's also things like Iron Man's armor, right? For those of you guys who were kind of curious, at what point did Tony Stark go from a guy who just flew around in an Iron Man suit as a Golden Avenger to becoming the guy who started experimenting with all these different armor types? This answers that as well. So a lot of things came out of Secret Wars, right? It's one of the reasons why this story is so important when it comes to the history of Marvel Comics. And so what this does is it initially picks up with Magneto, right? Now, if you guys recall in the last video, Magneto had kind of toyed with the idea of allying himself with the Avengers. But the idea was that while Magneto was essentially reforming and was on the road to becoming a good guy, which would ultimately come to fruition in Uncanny X-Men number 200, at the moment, he was still seen as a bad guy by the various heroes who were there. And so they immediately kind of started asking the question, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? And the kind of infighting that resulted left Magneto with really no other desire than to just leave everybody behind, right? So he ended up discovering his own personal citadel that he was using as a base of operations. Now, eventually he ended up in a second conflict with the superheroes, and when that happened, he basically collapsed part of the superheroes' citadel onto itself and then kidnapped Janet Van Dyne the Wasp, and we didn't really know the reason for that. But what this does is it comes to fruition when he basically frees Janet Van Dyne, and then of course she kind of pokes around the place for a little bit and then ultimately discovers Magneto. A small little bit of a skirmish ensues insofar as she basically shows, look, you know, I've got my wasp bite, I don't really need to attack you physically, but ultimately Magneto bringing her here is done for the purpose of basically talking to her and trying to find a way to communicate and sort of create an alliance of sorts with the Avengers, right? Or at least that seems to be the case. And the reason why was because right off the bat in that first skirmish, Magneto basically realized these folks aren't going to listen to reason, right? They're hell-bent on the idea that I'm a bad guy. What I'm going to need is one of them to vouch for me. And with Janet Van Dyne being the leader of the Avengers, albeit Captain America kind of being the field commander at the moment, what better person to do that than Janet Van Dyne? Now, I don't know if kidnapping her is the best way to sort of initiate that conversation, but it's one of these things where he does have his own motivation. We'll find out what that is, you know, as we progress further, but at the very least, to kind of seem to initiate a sort of truce between himself and the Avengers. Now, following that, what you get is this scenario where the heroes are kind of piecemealing things back together, right? Basically taking these portions of their base of operations, kind of bringing it back together and getting things back in their place and so on and so forth. Just kind of a rebuilding phase, right? Spider-Man is really kind of the main focal point for this little bit of the story. And the reason why is he's kind of making his way through, and Peter Parker, you know, with all the intellect that he has, is really doing what a lot of other people don't seem to be doing. Spider-Man's investigating the area, right? He's kind of like looking around and seeing what's going on, like, you know, what's up with this whole base of operations. You know, these citadels that the villains have and the ones that we have, and presumably the one that Magneto has, seem to kind of cater to our every need. So like, let's see how far this goes. Now, this will become a huge focal point once you get further into the Secret Wars story, and then you get Spider-Man Black. But until that point, Peter Parker's just kind of poking around. Now, ultimately, this leads him to coming across the X-Men. And in this moment, what he basically overhears the X-Men talking about is essentially leaving the Avengers. Now, again, this is one of the cool things about it, and it's one of the reasons why Jim Shooter writing was so cool, is because you get some infighting here, right? Not in the sense of a physical altercation, but in the sense of not everybody's on the same page, right? And rightfully so. That's one of the things about the X-Men. They've never really been on the same page as everybody else. The Avengers protect the world from various threats, and the X-Men deal with the whole mutant threat and humanity and so on and so forth, but no one's ever really been on the side of the X-Men, right? That's one of the reasons why Avengers versus X-Men was such a big story, is because up until that point, you would see instances where like the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, or like the X-Men and the Avengers would team up or something like that, but it wasn't very often that you heard of like the Right or the Friends of Humanity or Apocalypse or some villain like that popping up and then potentially destroying the X-Men, and then like the Avengers coming to their aid or the Fantastic Four coming to their aid. You never really saw that all that often. So in a lot of ways, the X-Men kind of adopted this philosophy that we're our own island, right? And which is why you kind of see the X-Men comics right now with Jonathan Hickman taking on the form that they are. They were always just kind of out there and isolated in the world. And that's sort of how, that's sort of the approach they're taking now. The issue is, you know, when they start saying things like, well, let's go to Magneto and let's ally with him, let's form an alliance, this immediately convinces Spider-Man that the X-Men are essentially working against the superheroes. Now, this is one of the most important parts of the story. And the reason why is because we've seen Spider-Man face off against various characters over the course of time in Marvel Comics. But the one of the questions that people ask all the time is, if Spider-Man fought Wolverine, who would win? If Spider-Man fought Colossus, who would win? You know, who would win in these different scenarios? What we get here is Spider-Man facing off against all the X-Men, and he beats them all. And the reason why is because of the one thing Spider-Man has that nobody else has, and that's his spider sense. Spider-Man's spider sense doesn't really say like, Wolverine's getting ready to attack you right now. Instead, it just says like, you're about to be attacked. But what it does is it always keeps him on guard, and it gives him a bit of an edge. It's like Goku from Dragon Ball Super with his Ultra Plot armor, right? The idea that it basically keeps you a step ahead of everybody else, so you never really seem to have to worry about being defeated. Now for Spider-Man, his spider sense does keep him aware in terms of people jumping into physical altercations, different things like that. So the reason why this benefits him is because while it is more of a defensive maneuver, right? It basically allows him to get out of harm's way. You can't hit what you can't touch. And that's basically why Spider-Man is so capable here. So if you notice this, between his agility, his webbing, like his intellect, the whole 9 yards, he takes out Rogue, he takes out Colossus, he takes out Wolverine, he basically is able to dodge Storm, he takes out Nightcrawler, like he takes out the entirety of the X-Men. Like none of them are really able to even lay a hand on him. He's that capable. And it's one of the reasons, if you go talk to Sal over a Comic Pop, it's one of the reasons why he'll be like, yeah man, Spider-Man is like probably one of the most capable superheroes out there in a variety of ways. Now, if it comes to someone like the Molecule Man, Owen Reese, sure, he'll disperse Spider-Man's atoms across the cosmos. So Spider-Man's not going to have much of a chance there. And one of the other things that really comes out of this is how would Spider-Man fare against someone like Charles Xavier? And where Xavier seems to be kind of out of commission for the moment, insofar as Spider-Man immediately punches him, it's the smart move to make, because Xavier is the only real credible threat there, right? Because his power is a mental power, and Spider-Man can't dodge, he can't bob and weave telepathic attacks. And that's really kind of the answer to that question. How would Spider-Man fare against a telepath? He wouldn't do very well at all. And the reason why is because once he gets away from the X-Men, he gets back out into the hallway and he comes across Reed Richards. Xavier had used his powers to wipe Spider-Man's mind of any indication that the X-Men were working to go basically ally themselves with Magneto. Now, Xavier's not too happy that he had to do that, but he did it because it was the only real choice they made. And so grabbing one of the vessels, which only really seems to allow it to be flown based on thought, and then of course Xavier basically taking the X-Men out into this maelstrom, out into this massive storm, in turn leads us over to Magneto and to Dr. Doom. Now, Magneto kind of starts putting the moves on Janet Van Dyne a little bit, right? Just kind of being like, hey, look, like girl, like, I'm hot. Like, that's like, he's putting the moves out, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting, but it's one of these things where basically Dr. Doom was trying to bring on Magneto as an ally. Now, of course, Magneto immediately turns him down. And when you leave Magneto and Janet Van Dyne and you switch over to Dr. Doom kind of laments this, right? Because the power of Magneto and the power to control the entire electromagnetic spectrum is no small thing. And this and other moments like this are kind of really pointing to this idea that Magneto really is just that damn powerful. But what we end up doing is we basically end up following Dr. Doom to where he approaches two characters. The first is Marsha Rosenberg, and the second one is Mary McFerrin. Now, those of you guys who are reading Immortal Hulk right now and you have Titania, this is how she gets her start, right? This is Mary McFerrin, the blonde one who's human looking. Marsha Rosenberg, she ends up changing her name to Volcana, right? And the way this is played out, it was kind of a tie-in, but not really. It took place in She-Hulk issue number 10. The way this worked out is that Mary and Marsha both lived in Denver, right? And around that time, that's when you started to see the rise of Spider-Woman, right? I think it was Julia Carpenter, the original Spider-Woman, although it may have been Jessica Drew. I don't think it was Jessica Drew. I don't think she was that early, but I could be wrong there. But regardless, when you ended up seeing Spider-Woman kind of making a name for herself in Denver, Colorado, this led to both Marsha and Mary kind of poking around and seeing what was going on. Now, while they were largely social outcasts, when everything took place at the beginning of Secret Wars, one portion of Battleworld is composed of Denver, Colorado. And so when the Beyonder took that part of the United States, yanked it out, and then brought it and used it to form part of Battleworld, they came along with it, right? So during the She-Hulk tie-in, that's when you're introduced to their characters. They're not overly important. It wouldn't really be until after this story they become important, especially Volcana and her relationship with Owen Reese, the Molecule Man. But it's one of these things where Titania is like, where she was kind of small and scrawny, came from a poor background. The abilities Dr. Doom used to modify her and to give her powers basically made her a larger woman, made her a more voluptuous woman, but also gave her like super strength, durability, different things like that. And so, following that, they're basically brought in by Dr. Doom to become allies alongside everybody else. Now, one of the things that you get right off the bat is kind of Titania looking to pick a fight with Crusher Creel, the Absorbing Man. This is where that relationship starts. For those of you guys who are reading Immortal Hulk right now, this is where that relationship kicks off, where the two of them really kind of form an on-again, off-again relationship. It's really kind of the definition of an unhealthy relationship, where they're constantly breaking up and constantly getting back together again. But that's more or less where it kind of kicks off. For the Molecule Man, his love interest really starts to take form in Marsha, right? And the reason why is because where Marsha had heard of the Molecule Man, it's kind of this legendary guy with this incredible power that he never really seemed to use to its full potential. She always saw him as more of like an imposing guy, right? The kind of like this really maybe arrogant or very, very haughty guy. Instead, when she meets him, he's a lot more sensitive than she initially thought he would be. And that's kind of a cool little moment there. And because what it does is it lays the groundwork for the relationship between the two of them, which would actually go on for more than a little while in Marvel Comics. But what ends up happening here is you kind of pick up with the next morning. Basically, Captain America wakes up realizing it's sunrise. He gets pissed at the Incredible Hulk for not telling him, the storm basically cleared up because this is the time when the villains would attack. And they do. The villains basically launch their attack against all the superheroes. And for the most part, with the combined help of Titania and Volcana, along with Ultron, who's basically been brought back, they get the upper hand quick, fast, and in a hurry, right? I mean, they take these guys out super fast. And it's kind of nuts, right? It's It's kind of bonkers because immediately the heroes are kind of caught unawares. And so as a result of that, with the heroes basically fleeing for their lives for the most part, what you end up getting is probably one of the more iconic moments of the story. And the reason why I say this is because you've kind of got, Dr. Octopus using some binoculars basically that he found within the Citadel and looking for the heroes, and ultimately finds them about 5 miles out, trying to regroup their forces and trying to get to a new Citadel or someplace they can basically hide and then heal themselves if they can, and then jump back into the fray again. But with that being the case, the Molecule Man, looking to show off to Volcana a little bit, basically says, well, I mean, I can stop him right there. So what he ends up doing is lifting up an entire mountain range, like a colossal mountain range, and then pushing it over on top of the heroes and then dropping it down. And it's kind of nuts, right? It's kind of bonkers because during this time, one of the reasons why you don't see Thor here is because Thor had previously gone to Amora the Enchantress and then basically said, let's leave here and let's talk about what we would do as gods, right? They kind of go out and form their own alliance. You've got the Avengers who are maintaining their alliance. You've got the X-Men who go and form their own alliance, presumably alongside Magneto. And then you've got Doctor Doom leading all the villains, right? So everybody's splitting up. All these factions are being created. So it's one of these things where everything really kind of seems to be going to pot to a degree. Now, in the midst of all this, ultimately you end up having Amora, who basically, with this giant mountain range crashing down, of course, it sends shockwaves throughout the entire planet. Amora grabs Thor. They end up taking off, arriving right in front of the villains, and then ultimately Doctor Doom basically uses Ultron. Now, of course, Amora kind of re-allies herself with the villains, and then Ultron basically uses a disintegration ray, as it was seen, and then ultimately just destroys, or at least seems to destroy Thor, right? Like completely and totally disintegrate Thor, which at the time was kind of mind-boggling, right? I mean, really for me, the only way to know whether or not this was mind-boggling is to go back and read the old letters pages. But if you go back and you read the letters pages for these stories, oh, it was crazy. People were blown away. They were just like, there's no way Thor was just killed by Ultron. Like, that's kind of nuts. It was a little bonkers to see it all go down, right? That's one of the reasons why letters pages are a really good resource for seeing how people were responding to comics back in the day, before you had forums, different things like that. But it was kind of a crazy thing because what ends up happening is the X-Men basically arrive to Magneto's Citadel. And it's kind of funny because as soon as they get there, Janet Van Dyne turns on Magneto, because what he does is he tells Charles Xavier basically what his plan is. And what he says here is if Doctor Doom basically slayed all the heroes, Doctor Doom would get his wish, right? His wish would be whatever his selfish desire happens to be, which would likely be Doctor Doom saying, I desire absolute power over the universe. And that would be it. With regards to the Avengers, who knows what the Avengers would do? And Magneto doesn't really trust the Avengers because they're humans. Even though they have superpowers, they're not mutants. And so he doesn't really trust them all too much. At the same time, what he tells Xavier is if we had that, if we slayed and we killed all the villains, then what we could do is we could wish for a paradise across the universe, right? Where like all mutants and all humans live in a peaceful coexistence with each other. Now, it's kind of an interesting scenario because on one side, you could look at that and you could say, that's a good idea, right? Because Xavier's plan hasn't worked. Xavier's idea of a peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants just never really seemed to work. And that's what you see playing out in Jonathan Hickman's X-Men right now, right? Xavier's like, look, I tried the peaceful route with you guys. You didn't want to play ball. So what we're going to do is we're going to form our own nation, and then we're going to conquer yours as time goes on, right? We're going to basically take over your infrastructure. I believe in you as people, but I don't believe in my dream anymore. That's really kind of the message that he's been conveying over the course of Hickman's X-Men run, right? So the dream just never really seemed to work out. So if that was never really the case, if it never really seemed to work, then go for a better option. Now, ultimately, it does take away the wills of people, but if the wills of people would have led to like a war between humans and mutants across the world, then just using some kind of utilitarian stance, it's the best decision to make, right? Because what you get is better than what you lose. And so it's one of these cool things, right? It's one of these cool little debates and philosophical arguments that goes on with these various things. Now, what you end up doing from here is you basically end up switching over, of course, where Janet Van Dyne goes back into her Wasp form, and then in turn, the various other X-Men, try to stop her from going back to the Avengers and basically saying, here's everything that's gone down. Wasp manages to overtake the X-Men and then in turn, basically bail out to where the Avengers are located at. And so what you end up doing is you switch over directly to the Incredible Hulk. And this again is one of the most iconic moments of Secret Wars, when the Incredible Hulk is holding a mountaintop up. Right now, at this point in time, this had never been seen before. We had never seen an instance of the Incredible Hulk displaying strength like this. And that was the intention of Jim Shooter, right? Pull out all the stops. Take these grandiose displays of each individual character, right? So Spider-Man is a character who's very, very capable. Let's show how capable he is by basically defeating all of the X-Men. The Incredible Hulk is super strong. Let's show how super strong he is by have him holding up a mountaintop. That's the kind of thing that Jim Shooter was going for when he was writing Secret Wars. And that's why you see things like this. And so what ends up happening here is because of the fact that the Incredible Hulk is tiring, right? It's not something he could do forever. He couldn't really sit there like for years and hold this mountaintop up. Even the Incredible Hulk, despite all of his strength, does have a limit to a degree. This is compounded by the fact that this is during the era when you've got basically the Incredible Hulk's strength and Bruce Banner's mind, right? So with that in mind, there are some limits here. It's not infinite. It's not really infinite insofar as the Incredible Hulk's not angry, right? The Incredible Hulk's strength rises with his anger. At this point, he's just kind of like, I really hope we don't die. Like, that's basically it. but nonetheless, what they end up doing is basically waking up Reed Richards, after he had basically, passed out or been knocked out. And then in turn, he starts like MacGyvering everything, right? Like, he basically ends up taking like some of Iron Man's armor, tapping into it, or the web shooters of Spider-Man, the arrows of Hawkeye. It's just straight up MacGyver. And it's just like, give me these small little things, right? I need like a rubber band, a piece of gum, and a toothpick. And by God, we'll get out of here, folks. That's kind of what it turns out to be. But what he does is he basically uses these various things and then manages to channel these various forms of energy through Iron Man's armor, which, going with a full repulsor, blows a hole in a mountainside. Now, this is why this matters, is because after this story going forward, where you saw Iron Man sort of experimenting with these small little armor types here and there, this would push everything into a whole new level. And in fact, it's because of this realization of what his armor is capable of, what it can truly do if you put it to the test and expands on it, that 3 years after Secret Wars in 1987, Bob Layton wrote Stark Wars, or Armor Wars, as it's more popularly known. But again, it's one of these cool little things, where like Secret Wars spun out a whole bunch of new stuff from Marvel Comics, which is a pretty big deal, right? That's why it's such a significant story. But following this, the heroes basically need a new base of operations, right? They need a place to go to in order to remarshal their forces, get their stuff together, and get back into it again. And so what you end up getting is Spectrum, Monica Rambeau, heading out, kind of traveling around, looking for some place where they can rest and recuperate, and then ultimately discovering a small little village. Now, this village has like some people in it, and we can largely assume this village is one of many places that was ripped out from the universe and basically brought to form Battleworld, right? So it's just some planet somewhere where they don't really speak English, but they do have the ability to heal. And so they basically start healing Johnny Storm along with a few other people, but then Ben Grimm suddenly snaps back into going back into his Thing form, right? So he's no longer human anymore. This will be explained as we get further into it, but it is kind of a cool little thing. But the big takeaway from all this is what you end up getting is where Galactus is kind of standing on this hillside that does overlook this village, that what ends up going on is Reed Richards is just kind of musing and kind of looking around and saying, okay, it's a little weird that Galactus is here, but I don't really know why he's here, but I do understand why him feeling as lonely as he does, right? The fact that he's just kind of out here by himself in the same way that Reed is out here by himself in a lot of different ways. Well, then suddenly Galactus moves and puts his hands in the air, and Reed Richards immediately understands what this means, because what this does mean is that Galactus is now beginning the process of putting his machinery together. Galactus is going to start consuming the battle world. He's going to start consuming that entire planet. It's kind of nuts. Okay, we are continuing on into our video series on Secret Wars, and we are covering part 3, the Earth's Superheroes versus Galactus. But before we start to this video is sponsored by Skillshare. So Skillshare is an online learning community that offers membership with meaning. With so much to explore, real projects to create, and the support of fellow creatives, Skillshare empowers you to accomplish your goals. One of my favorite classes is Real Productivity, How to Build Habits That Last, which is taught by Thomas Frank. In this class, you learn things like how to determine your goals, how to set yourself up for success, how to use external systems, and probably one of the most important aspects, what to do when you fail, and how to keep yourself motivated. So if you're looking to expand on your skills or gain new ones, and you also want to do this in an incredibly affordable way, especially when compared to pricey in-person classes and workshops, then Skillshare is giving away 2 free months of premium membership to help you explore your creativity if you click the link in the description box. And after that, it's only around $10 a month. Now that I think about it, I feel like I should go on Skillshare and teach people how to become comic book YouTubers. That'd be pretty awesome. But in the last video, we were talking about how, or at least we ended the video basically, with Galactus forming his ship for the purpose of like consuming Battleworld, right? Because that's Galactus's thing. He usually brings the ship with him, the parts that he needs are on the ship. It's better than just toting them around, right? Like Galactus walking around with like a giant backpack, just like all like just throwing it on his back, like Peter McKinnon style, and then just like consuming worlds. Galactus with a cup of coffee and just like giving you tutorials on how to consume worlds. But nonetheless, in the last video, we were talking about how Galactus was basically in the process of getting ready to consume all of Battleworld. And what this does is it sets up a pretty tricky situation. For the heroes, you've already got a lot of infighting. That's one of the things that we've kind of discussed here, is a lot of the infighting going on insofar as everybody kind of parceling themselves out and forming their own different factions, right? So the X-Men have their own faction, the Avengers have their own faction, the villains have their own faction, and it kind of goes down from there. And then in turn, now you have a bigger threat in the form of Galactus. Now the benefit benefit of this is that it unites everybody, right? It's kind of the unifying factor. It's the immediate threat. And the truth is that given the nature of Galactus, it'll take pretty much everybody to be involved in this in order to pull it off. Now, the other part here, and this is kind of a funny thing, the other part here is that Colossus is sort of thinking about Kitty Pryde, the fact that he's so far from her, the fact that he misses her, and he's just kind of daydreaming and thinking about it when Xavier appears out of nowhere and he's like, Colossus, come at once, and it's like, Colossus, stop tugging on it, like it's it's kind of a funny little thing. I always thought that was entertaining. But in any event, one of the things that I hope you guys are noticing about Xavier in this story is that his patience is exceedingly thin, right? He's acting a lot more like a jerk than you would normally expect. It's something to kind of take note of. It's something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Now, the other part of this is the Molecule Man. Now, remember, the Molecule Man is essentially the most powerful being in the universe, albeit Owen Reese doesn't really use his powers to his full extent, and we'll find out why as we progress further through Secret Wars. But of course, he's found a kind of romance in Volcana, right? In Marcia Rosenberg. And so they end up running up on a handful of these guys, and some of them start giving him right? They start giving him a hard time. And the result of this is that the Molecule Man's like, okay, so like one of them calls him like a nerd or something like that, and he starts to freak out. So he basically turns the guy's suit into like metal, right? He alters the molecules or the atoms of his suit, turns it into metal, and then just leaves him there. And then Marcia stomps his face into the ground. Now, this is a very important lesson to understand, kids. Violence is not always the answer. That's true. But it is a answer, and it's usually a very effective one. So just something to keep in mind. If you're going to pick a fight, make sure it's a fight you can win. But at the end of the day, of course, this is also one of the crazy displays of Owen Reese's power, is he basically uses the atoms of the air around him to kind of coalesce them into various molecules and then form a kind of chariot for him and Volcana to basically fly off on. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. The Molecule Man altered the atomic and subatomic structure of matter so that he could create a chariot out of thin air using the atoms around him in the air, and then in turn use his power to fly. It's a ridiculous display of power. And these are the kind of things that you're seeing. Now, I'm hoping that if you're familiar with Owen Reese, and even if you're not, right? I mean, he never really used a whole lot of his power in a really grand scheme, at least not really like this, previously. It's the small little things like this that highlight the idea that Owen Reese is beginning to learn how to use his power more effectively. Now, the next thing that you get is you get Enchantress showing up to Doctor Doom. Now, normally I would just kind of skim past this, but this is exceedingly important. And the reason why is because Enchantress is one of these characters where she's been around for a very, very, very long time. And she's fought some very heavy hitters, right? When Asgard was invaded by Mangog, she was there, right? Like she was there watching it all go down. And so she knows how dangerous like big level threats can be. What you end up getting here is you end up getting Enchantress who's seen some pretty heavy hitters and understands the severity of the situation. Remember, in the very first issue, Galactus tried to go after the Beyonder and was batted away like an insect and then sent crashing down to Battleworld, where he was left unconscious for a short amount of time, right? So like the Beyonder knocked Galactus out cold without even really physically touching him, right? Just like kind of with a spray of his power is really how that happened. And so Enchantress, understanding the grand scheme of things, really kind of goes to Dr. Doom, and it's just like, we should leave this place, right? Like there's a kind of barrier that prevents us from leaving, but given your knowledge of sorcery, given my knowledge of magic and sorcery and so on and so forth, we can find a way to leave. And initially Dr. Doom's response is no, like that's not going to happen. I'm going to take the prize of the Beyonder and I'm going to get everything that I've ever desired. And then Enchantress actually offers to fix the face of Dr. Doom. Now, that's kind of one of the big talking points of his character, right? The fact that his face was scarred at one point in the past. And if you read Books of Doom, you get one origin. If you read Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four Annual #2, which I actually have the physical copy of, which is amazing, you get another origin. But nonetheless, the face of Dr. Doom was scarred. Largely, it's believed that it was scarred, not in the explosion he sustained in college, but when he basically started forming his armor, and then he put the hot mask on his face. That's what scarred his face, right? But regardless, it's always kind of been one of these things where he's always tried to find a way to cure his scars so he can take his mask off. When Enchantress offers that for a moment, Dr. Doom takes it, but then immediately says, no, that's not going to happen, because what I have to gain by taking the power of the Beyonder dwarfs whatever you can give me with your magics and your seductive nature and so on and so forth. And so the result is that he basically sends her packing. Now, of course, with her, she just kind of like, okay, let's leave. But she's absolutely terrified of what could happen here, because the truth is they could all really die, right? Like the possibility of their death is a real and a tangible thing. Now, the other thing about this, and this is one of the coolest displays of Galactus's power, is that with what he's trying to do in terms of reconstitute his machinery and then consume all the energies of Battleworld and basically leave it a dead husk and killing everybody on it in the process, is you have Charles Xavier and you have Magneto, who really kind of try to create this sort of beacon and trying to get the attention of Galactus, where Reed Richards and all of them are sort of looking at what's going on. Galactus just kind of looks towards the direction of Xavier and Magneto and blows up that portion of the Citadel, right? Just like just detonates it right now. It's an easy thing to look over, but understand this, like Galactus just looks over their direction and presumably destroys a huge portion of their vessel, right? Without even going to it, without even like walking over there and like channeling his power through his hands or anything like that. That's the kind of power that we're talking about here. It's interesting, and it's a small little thing. I always love seeing stuff like that, but I thought it might be interesting to point attention to. The other part of this is that what he ends up doing is summoning a device of his own creation to deal with the Avengers and to deal with all the forces who were there. And that's one of the things to remember about Galactus, right? He doesn't really care about the goings on of mortals. They don't matter to him. And in truth, it kind of makes sense, right? Galactus was born into this universe. He's going to die with this universe and be born into the next one, right? He'll live for all eternity, right? So long as the multiverse continues to exist and any one universe or this universe that he's in can die and be reborn again, Galactus will always live on. Now, we know from various stories in the past that we've seen and with a history of the Marvel Universe by Mark Waid that Galactus and Franklin Richards will actually merge into a singular being and then be born into the next universe. But Galactus doesn't care, right? I mean, the life and death of any one of the superheroes passes like that in the eyes of Galactus, right? In the time that he's been around, in the billions of years he's existed, and the billions of more years that he will exist, their life will have been a moment in time. So he doesn't care about any of them. It's really kind of beneath him to like engage in a physical fight. Instead, he sends out somewhat of a proxy. And by and large, this proxy isn't really designed to overpower and destroy the heroes. It's designed to keep them distracted, keep them away, right? So it's like being tracked by a whole bunch of hungry wolves and then just like killing some deer and leaving it there for the wolves to feed on so they're not coming after you. And for the most part, they're initially successful here insofar as the heroes manage to take down this, this massive robot, and that's kind of the end of that. But then from there, you also have the villains who end up showing up with regards to the heroes themselves, right? The heroes facing off against the villains. A fight kind of breaks out yet again. And for the most part, the fight plays out the way you would expect it to. But here's the important thing that goes on here. While Galactus is doing all this, while Galactus is focusing on building his machinery, and while the heroes and the villains are all facing off against each other, the X-Men and the Avengers are fighting against all the villains, what you have is Doctor Doom. And this is the important thing. This is the reason why Doctor Doom is so dangerous, because Doctor Doom is an opportunist. He's exceedingly smart and he can usually create his own opportunities, but if one presents itself to him, he will take it. And what he's been looking for is a way to basically usurp the power of Galactus. That's what he's been looking for all this time, a way to take the power of Galactus and then in turn try to find a way to steal the power of the Beyonder. And so while everybody's engaging in all these fights and Galactus is distracted doing his thing and the heroes and villains are distracted doing their thing, what you get is Doctor Doom, who basically boards the ship of Galactus. And when he gets in there, he starts kind of poking around, taking a look, seeing what's going on. When he gets in there, what you end up having here is you end up having a return of Ulysses Klaue. Now, here's the funny thing about this, right? Ulysses Klaue coming back doesn't matter, right? If you're just kind of like, well, I mean, like, who cares about that? You're right. Nobody cares. Nobody cares that Ulysses Klaue is back. The reason why he's back and the way in which he quote unquote died is hilarious. So like what ended up happening is in Dazzler Volume 1, issue number 9, Ulysses Klaue, I remember reading this. It was terrible. Ulysses Klaue ends up running up on Dazzler, right? And Dazzler has the ability to absorb sound and turn it into light energy. So literally Ulysses Klaue is made of sound. So like he goes running up on her and she's like, no, I ain't got time for this. And she just like absorbs him. And that's basically it. Like he gets totally deuced on by Dazzler. She just like absorbs him into herself. And she's like, all done, folks. Back to what you were doing. And that's basically it. Now, the funny thing is that takes place in issue number 9. In issues 10 and 11, she's taken by Galactus to become his herald in order to basically free and get back Terrax the Tamer. And that's kind of a funny thing because when the question is asked by Doctor Doom, like why are you here? Like, how did you manage to get here? Like, why are you on Galactus' ship? What you find out is that when Dazzler was taken by Galactus, she initially tried to fight and she blasted Galactus with a whole bunch of light energy, which was basically her just kind of like dispelling Ulysses Klaue. And when that happened, Ulysses Klaue really kind of seemed to vibrate or remain within the physical ship itself, and then ultimately was coalesced down into this energy form that Doctor Doom ultimately released. But it's kind of funny because as soon as Ulysses Klaue is done telling the story, Doctor Doom's like, whatever, man, I don't care, like, you bore me. And which is pretty much the response of everybody who's reading this story. Everybody was just kind of like, it's Ulysses Klaue, man. Like he's only ever done like one good thing, and that was invade Wakanda, and that was it. Nonetheless, the idea of Doctor Doom is to usurp the power of Galactus, to steal the power of Galactus. So what he does is he basically forms a plan with Ulysses Klaue and says, you're going to go down to the surface and you're going to give this plan to them. You're going to tell people what's going on, at least insofar as what I want them to know. And that's basically going to be it. But what it does is it brings all the villains basically to this giant volcano that kind of exists out there. And then of course, Charles Xavier using his powers to kind of scan the minds of everyone everybody, ultimately coming across the Enchantress, who's just like, get out of my head, your powers suck, and then just like shuts him out. Ultimately leads to Xavier bringing the X-Men back, and then in turn sending him on this mission. But here's an important thing that goes on here. Storm, as it stands right now, is the leader of the X-Men, right? This came as part of the end of the Dark Phoenix saga and the fallout to the end of the Dark Phoenix saga, when Cyclops was basically leaving the X-Men team. And there was a kind of duel that took place between him and Storm to determine who the leader of the team should be. And Storm ultimately ended up winning. And so because Storm overpowered Cyclops, she was now the field commander. Cyclops left to do his own thing, which really went into like Madeline Pryor and all that kind of good stuff, and the birth of Cable, so on and so forth. But Storm was not one of the, well, she really didn't fall rank and file with Cyclops insofar as Cyclops was a believer, right? He was a person that you couldn't sway. You couldn't convince him that Xavier was wrong. He believed 100% in the dream. And the truth is that while Storm believes in the idea of the dream, she doesn't see everything exactly the way that Xavier does. And so where Xavier is really being really acting a lot like a dick in a lot of ways, Storm calls him out, and it's just like, I'm the one who commands the X-Men team. You're the teacher, right? You're the instructor. You're the tutor, and that's cool and everything. But don't be confused about your place in the bigger picture. When it comes to us going out on missions, the fact that you're here doesn't change anything in relation to what it is that I do. What I do is I command the team when we're out in the field. Right now, we're out in the field. You just happen to be out here with us. But understand, I'm the one making the orders. I'm the one making the call. I'm the one that tells people what to do. Let me do my damn job. That's basically her response here. And it's kind of cool because Xavier really doesn't seem to back down. He's kind of like, no, the stakes are hugely high. You can't possibly seem to fathom it, understand it, and all that kind of stuff. And Storm's like, I don't care. It's my job to command the team. If you have insight, give me insight, but do not take my job away from me. I will do my job myself, you know, and it's a cool moment. It's one of these things that Jim Shooter was really good at kind of continuing on the writing of Chris Claremont, if only for a small degree, right? He couldn't do this for the long term. Ultimately, he would lose himself in his own style of writing, and everything Chris Claremont did would kind of go away. But in this moment right here, it really is an almost perfect reflection of what Chris Claremont would have done, because he would have written it the exact same way. You also get a few other things going on here. For example, Colossus is really starting to dream more of this girl, Saji, I think is how you pronounce her name, or Saji, who's one of the local villagers who's been running around healing people. What you have right now is Johnny Storm, who's basically in love with this chick, and they're like hanging out and dating and like kissing and hugging and all that kind of cool stuff. And so Colossus is developing feelings too, which is kind of messed up because like Colossus, man, here's the thing, man. Colossus, you got to get up on that game, man, because if you let it keep going the way it is, Johnny Storm's going to get the girl and you're going to be left standing there feeling sad and bad for yourself. Man, do what you got to do, right? All's fair in love and war, right? So that's basically it, you know. And so but the thing about Colossus is he's kind of torn, right? On one side, it's Kitty Pryde, who is his love interest back on Earth. On the other side is this chick he just met, who he feels like he's in love with, but doesn't really know that well, right? You know, so it was really more feelings of infatuation than anything else. But it's kind of leaving Colossus a little bit torn, and even to some degree, a little bit heartbroken, you know, with regards to the fact that Johnny Storm's with this chick, you know, doing, you know, they're doing the damn thing. And like Colossus is just like laying in a bed, you know, wishing he was with Kitty Pryde, but also kind of likes this chick too. Make a choice, man. Like quit resting on your laurels. Make a choice and do something. But with the X-Men basically tracking the various villains down to this massive volcano, and then all of them really sort of engaging in a fight with each other, things get kind of interesting here, right? Because as the volcano begins to erupt, right, as it begins to sort of go off, the X-Men bail. And instead, the question kind of becomes like, how can anybody stop Galactus, right? So this one doesn't really end on the same kind of cliffhanger as the ones we've seen before, right? But the question is, can anybody stop Galactus, and how does anybody do it? The answer is actually going to come in a more interesting way than you probably think. Okay, so we are continuing on with Secret Wars, and we are into part 4. Here's the thing. Okay, so James Rhodes is Iron Man, and Julia Carpenter was the second Spider-Woman. Jessica Drew was the first. I guess I'm kind of going crazy. Like, I really need to stop relying on my memory and start looking things up. But I was kind of like, it's worked for the last 6 years, right? Since we've done this YouTube channel, so surely my memory is not fading. I'm forgetting everything. All my knowledge is gone, and now I have to rely on Wikipedia articles. That's terrible. But anyway, so here's the thing. So we're kind of picking up with the last one, right? In the last issue, we kind of saw this individual, this person, we didn't know who they were, basically spying on what was going on with regards to the Avengers and the various superheroes, only for us to find out that it is actually Julia Carpenter who's watching it all go down. Now, for those of you guys who don't really know who Julia Carpenter is, she's pretty old school, right? I mean, this was her first appearance here, but you didn't really get her origin until Spider-Woman Volume 2, issue number 2. I think it was a 4-issue miniseries back in 1993. And the way this played out is what you had was a woman named Valerie Cooper. Now, Valerie Cooper, I think, really gained her most popular role when she was the liaison and really part of like the Commission on Superhuman Affairs. But the idea was that Valerie Cooper was at one point the leader of X Factor, right? The original X Factor team was the original X-Men who had basically gone on to form their own team after you got the new X-Men, Wolverine, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, all those characters. And so because that, when that X Factor team was rolled over into the other X-Men, and then you got X-Men Gold and X-Men Blue, a new X Factor team was formed, and I believe it had Valerie Cooper at the head, who basically was a communication operative between X Factor and the federal government. But the Commission on Superhuman Affairs was designed for the purpose of monitoring superhuman activity, but also trying to find a way to bend it to their cause, right? So kind of this sort of tail end, or this last vestige of Project Wide Awake. And the way this worked with Julia Carpenter is that Valerie Cooper and her had known each other for quite some time. And Julia Carpenter had been brought in, and I believe it was Dr. Noto, I think it was that woman in particular, who kind of helped to sort of acclimate Julia Carpenter to what was going on. And the idea here was that Julia Carpenter was basically told, we're going to conduct some experiments, we're going to test your physical prowess and so on and so forth for induction into this program. And they basically ended up injecting her with a substance. Now, the explanation given at the time was basically, we need this in order to measure your reaction time with regards to different exercise activities. In reality, it was some exotic plants combined with spider venom that basically gave her most of the powers of Spider-Man. And so the result of that is she went forward as the second Spider-Woman, right? So she's got a kind of interesting origin. I think it's one of the more intriguing origins of the various Spider characters who are out there. But at the end of the day, this is basically her first appearance. Now, again, much like Titania and Volcana, she was in Denver, Colorado when Denver was ripped out from Earth and used to form part of Battleworld, right? So that's the reason why she's here in the first place. Now, initially, the various superheroes that are here kind of seem to be, well, at least she believes they're skeptical, and they are skeptical, but not for the reason that she thinks. Her initial response and her initial fear is, you guys are afraid that I'm a spy sent here by the various villains in order to basically figure out what's going on. And the reason why is because it would be the smart thing to do, right? The response of Captain America is, no, we're not worried about that because Dr. Doom has more than enough power, right? But just because you can use all that power to thwart your enemy doesn't mean it's the best maneuver to make. The best thing to do and the smartest thing to do would be to put a spy in on the other side. The crazy thing about this is the villains, if you guys recall from the last issue, had basically ended up shooting Wasp, right? So they come rolling in, in their tank. They literally like dump the body of Wasp in front of everybody and ride off. They're like, here you go, guys, and then just like throw the body out there, peace, and then bail. And it's just like, damn, like that's ridiculously hardcore. Well, of course, following this, they end up going to see Saji, who's basically the healer in the local village that was, again, ripped away from another planet. And where she attempts to heal Wasp, it doesn't work. And the indication here is that Wasp has basically died, that Wasp was killed by the villains. And so what you end up doing is you end up switching over to Volcana. Now, this is not a really huge moment here, but it is a small little thing, especially if you get into Secret Wars 2. And the reason why is because this really kind of shows how much she cares about Owen Reese. Now, the nature of Volcana over the course of her character's history is that she was one of those who always sort of looked at the idea of, for the kind of weaker guy, the more feminine guy, the guy that's kind of the one that gets pushed over, that gets picked on, that kind of thing. She always kind of had a thing for him, right? Kind of mothering them, is really kind of the situation that she ran into. And ultimately, she ends up traveling to Enchantress in order to find some way to barter passage to Owen Reese's location, not knowing exactly where he is or when he's going to be coming back, whatever the case happens to be. Now, of course, Enchantress basically offers that, she basically says, okay, and it comes with a price, although we don't know what the price is initially. Instead, like when Volcana arrives on the scene to meet Owen Reese, and she's immediately mothering him, right? Oh, my poor baby, and that kind of a thing. And the reason why I say this is important, and the reason why it's so intriguing, is because when you look at the character of Owen Reese over the course of Marvel, you look at this guy that basically had no confidence in himself, then he turned into a guy who started getting laid, and then he was a guy who had a lot of confidence in himself, which is usually how it works. That's usually how it works, right? Like everybody's faking confidence until they actually have it, right? It's kind of the way this whole process works when it comes to guys. But the fact remains that with this whole thing with her, it's interesting because ultimately what it's going to turn into is Owen Reese, as you guys know, is going to become the most powerful person in the universe, if not during the events of Secret Wars 2, probably one of the most powerful people in the multiverse, right? Like there was a point during Secret Wars 2, by the time you got to the ending of that story, the Beyonder was by and large the most powerful being in all of creation, right? The most powerful being in the entirety of the multiverse. And that kind of, but does not include the One Above All. The reason why is because at the point of Secret Wars 2, the One Above All didn't have a physical form. There was no reason to believe it actually existed, and that made the Beyonder the most powerful being in all of Marvel Comics. From there, you went into the Molecule Man, who was roughly about the same level of power, maybe a little bit weaker depending on how you want to look at it, how you want to interpret that story. But overall, Owen Reese would basically become God, right? So you're talking about a guy who was really just kind of being mothered all the time and really didn't have a lot of confidence in himself, to being elevated to becoming one of the most powerful beings in all of existence. The irony is just kind of interesting there. But what you end up doing is you also kind of switch over to Absorbing Man. Now, Normally I would skim this, but this is important. And the reason why is because this is one of those moments that you get in comics when suddenly everything changes for a character. Previously, we didn't really know the full extent of what Crusher Creel could do. We didn't know that he could basically put himself back together. And that's what he does here, right? He ended up losing his arm, or when he was stoned, his arm was cut off by Wolverine. And so then it turned into, okay, like I wonder if he can basically heal himself. And that's what he does. He takes his stone arm, puts it up to his shoulder, and then snaps back to being human. And it's right back to where it was supposed to be, right? Everything is normal. It hurts like hell, but everything is normal, right? So basically he can heal himself. Now, there are limits to this. If like he's hit by a giant wrecking ball and smashed into like a zillion pieces, well, obviously he can't do that because he can't physically put himself back together. But with something like this, it's entirely possible, right? It's a cool little thing. It's one of these moments where the character's story basically changes in such a way to where things are wholly unique. And so what you end up doing here is you end up picking up with She-Hulk, who launches an attack against the villains. Now, She-Hulk's doing this of her own accord. That's one of the things to understand is Captain America's initial response when the idea of She-Hulk was presented and saying, let's go kill the villains for killing Wasp. Captain America wasn't really even taking the stance of no, because that's the wrong thing to do. We as heroes don't kill, because in reality, it would have been practical and it would have made sense, right? Just kill the villains for killing Wasp and then call it a day, right? The whole Secret Wars event is over and then the heroes win, they get everything they ever wanted, and that's basically it. The response of Captain America was, we don't need to scatter our forces too thin. That's not what needs to happen. And She-Hulk is one of the heavy hitters on the Avengers. The result is that She-Hulk basically blew that order off and then went to go attack the villains head on. Now, Captain America's concern was not that she would be unable to hold her own. That's one of the things about She-Hulk. She's really, really, really powerful, like really strong. She's not Incredible Hulk OP, but she's certainly strong in her own right. And she's certainly strong enough to take on pretty much all of these superheroes, which she does, right? Like she wrecks pretty much everybody until you end up getting to the point where Titania steps in, and then Titania basically starts thrashing She-Hulk. She-Hulk ends up getting like the crap beat out of her with like crowbars and all kinds of stuff. Like everybody's just absolutely pummeling this chick. And so the villains are just like, let's kill this woman. Like let's kill this girl. Now on the other side of the equation, what you have is Doctor Doom. And Doctor Doom has been going out and doing his thing, right? His goal was to basically find a way to steal the power cosmic, to steal the totality of Galactus's power. And in doing so, find a way with that kind of power to in turn steal the power of the Beyonder. And so with that being the case, of course, he basically managed to find a way aboard Galactus's ship. And the interesting thing about all this is as he's going through, he's basically like, there's all these arms and armament here that I could use any one of them to conquer a whole galaxy. But even then, they all still pale in comparison to like the power of Galactus. That's what I need. At the same time, Galactus kind of starts to get this sort of sixth sense that like something's just not right. You know, something's off, right? Kind of like this itch that he can't quite scratch. And so what he does is he starts scanning the surface of the planet and then scans the ship. And when he does, he immediately realizes Doom is there and then sends him away, helps him understand the error of his ways, that's the best way to put it, and then sends him back. And at that point, Doom really almost kind of seems to give up. Like, I couldn't steal the power of Galactus. This is all basically done. Like, there's no real point here. Like, whatever, man. Like, you know, and almost just kind of settles in and goes in for the long sleep, right? It's kind of crazy. And so from there, Charles Xavier actually extends a kind of olive branch here and gives Captain America's team a bit of a reprieve, right? Because Captain America's team and they were just sort of monitoring Galactus, watching what he's doing and looking to see how far he's willing to go, right? Because this world-consuming device has been constructed, but it hasn't been activated yet. Instead, Galactus is just kind of toying with these various, you know, things that are going on and, you know, kind of tinkering with his device more or less is what it looks like. But then in turn, like, you end up having Charles Xavier who pops in, right? And then telepathically communicating with Captain America says, hey, look, man, you guys go take out the various villains. You guys go get your revenge for Wasp. Me and the X-Men will go over there and we'll basically keep an eye on what's going on, right? The X-Men Magneto will basically monitor what it is that Galactus is doing while you guys are off doing your thing. And the reality, and this is a smart move by Captain America, he gives the heroes what they want. Basically says, okay, let's go avenge Wasp. Because the reality is that in an emotional situation like this, the worst thing Captain America could do, especially with She-Hulk now going missing, the numbers are kind of thinning out. And if Captain America kept saying, no, we have to focus on Galactus, what this would do is it would almost give the impression to the heroes that Captain America doesn't care. Now, we know that's not the case, and the heroes know that's not the case. But as you guys are aware, when emotions get involved, logic goes flying out the window. What Captain America would be facing wouldn't be so much of a mutiny as it is the various superheroes just kind of being like, well, then let's go do our thing. And it all comes crumbling down, right? Because now they're all separated. They're all kind of all over the place and nothing really works out for them. And so because of that, what you end up getting is Captain America basically rallying the troops and saying, let's go get them, right? So now there's a solid goal to face. And that's one of the important things to understand when it comes to like game theory, when it comes to conflict, different things like that. If you're the leader and people are looking at you in a way where like they're questioning your leadership, then create an enemy and send them after that enemy. And then in turn, they will rally under you. The rhyme or reason only has to be paper thin, right? Just give them a reasonably acceptable reason for why you can do it, and then in turn, send them out there. They'll rally under you, they'll rally to your side, and then in turn, you'll basically have them kind of back on your terms again. It's game theory 101, right? It's one of the things that you do when you're a leader who's being looked at by the people who follow you with questionable eyes. Again, it's a really, really smart move by Captain America. Now, when they show up here, this fight, again, you know, as we've kind of seen in the last few videos, and as I told you guys in the last video, this is going to happen pretty frequently. The fight goes exactly as you would expect, right? I mean, you've got the villains who are doing their thing and they're pummeling some of the heroes are pummeling some of the villains. Ben Grimm basically turns back into his normal self when he's fighting the Absorbing Man. You do have Julia Carpenter who shows up, and that's kind of one of the cool things. You do get this sort of conflict where she's able to hold her own using her increased strength, but she's by no means somebody who's able to turn the tide and give the heroes like the definitive win. Now, Enchantress chiming in also kind of turns the tables, right? Especially when it comes to the Incredible Hulk, in the sense that she's able to use her ability to ensnare others to try to ensnare the Hulk, which she successfully does, shutting down the mind of Bruce Banner more or less, kind of putting him in an incapacitated state. From there, Captain America steps in, and this is one of the cool things, because where Enchantress goes to use her abilities on Captain America to try to ensnare him, right, it doesn't work. Captain America's like, nope, because his willpower is so strong, right? It's just kind of one of these things where he's able to resist the influence of Enchantress, and then basically from there, it kind of boils down into a fight. Now, this is why Captain America is so cool. This is one of the reasons why people love Captain America so much, is because Captain America, I mean, what is he really when you look at him? Captain America is a guy from World War II who could run really fast and punch really hard. He's one of the least powerful characters in all of Marvel Comics, right? Like, he's really not that great. When you look at like Marvel as a whole, and you look at like Magneto, and you look at Storm, and you look at Gambit, and you look at all these different characters, Captain America is really not that great. He's a really good fighter, and that's about it. But what Captain America has, and it really in his benefit, is battle strategy, and the fact that Captain America is never really daunted, because what you have right here is Captain America fighting an Asgardian god, and Captain America gets the upper hand on her with a quickness. I mean, literally, he dodges the attack, comes running up on her with a shield, and knocks her out. It's one of the cool things, you know, it's one of these moments when you see Captain America facing off against somebody who, by all standards of measurement, is far superior than him, but still getting the upper hand is kind of a cool thing, right? Because battle strategy and being able to understand how to engage your opponent goes a long way in comparison to like an opponent who's untrained in like battle strategy, military strategy, different things along those lines, right? It's a cool little thing to have go on there, just sort of see this go down. And so what you end up getting is, of course, the various villains who are all pretty much defeated by the superheroes, but you get this really cool moment too, right? Where you end up having Ultron who shows up and immediately starts attacking everybody, right? Now, from there, you have basically Johnny Storm who rolls up on him, and Captain America's just like, do whatever you need to do to take Ultron down, right? Because you're talking about a killer robot with an adamantium body. Ultron is not going to be taken out with like a punch from the Incredible Hulk. It's going to take a lot more than that. And so what ends up going on is you basically have Johnny Storm who goes like seemingly, you know, at one of the higher levels of his power, but in doing that, it's enough to basically knock out Ultron, right? So Johnny Storm letting off a huge amount of power is pretty cool. It couldn't destroy the adamantium body of Ultron, but it was enough to basically cause his inside to overheat, and then in turn, Ultron basically is incapacitated. It's a cool little thing, because then from there, Captain America basically goes to see Doom and is like, let's end this once and for all. And then it's like, Doom, hello? Hello, Dr. Doom. And like, Doom's just facing what seems to be complete and total utter defeat. And so in the face of that, Captain America's like, whatever, man, this guy's out of commission. He's no real threat to anybody. Let's call it a day, right? So She-Hulk's basically rescued. The other villains outside of Dr. Doom are put inside these kind of stasis cells where they're basically locked away. And then from there, they end up discovering, of course, that Wasp is actually alive, right? That you end up having Captain Marvel, who's basically realizes Wasp's alive, along with Hawkeye. Now, of course, the reason why this happens is, of course, she wasn't really dead. She was basically kind of incapacitated. It's kind of an interesting scenario, right? Because while all that conflict and everything was going on, you basically had Zazie, who looked like she was essentially dying. And so Colossus, in a state of panic, races her back to her hut, and then basically starts kind of imbuing her with the same fumes she used to imbue with him when she healed him. And then in turn, he starts to sort of look at her and understand what's going on. And what she had done was kind of push her powers to the limit in an attempt to heal Wasp and bring her back from the brink of death, which she successfully did. The other thing that kind of comes out of this, and this is kind of the namesake of the video, right? The other thing that comes out of this is Spider-Man Black. This is something that happens at the very tail end of the story. And the reason why is because in the middle of all this, once the heroes sort of rally and once the villains are dealt with, the heroes are kind of taking a little moment to kind of rest and recuperate, some R&R, and then Thor comes back with his cape and outfit totally fixed, right? He looks as good as new. The Incredible Hulk's the same way, and they basically say, hey man, there's a room back there, and all you have to do is basically go to this device and tell it exactly what you want, and then in turn, like it'll give it to you, right? So it'll give you, you know, your costume or whatever the case is if you want to get it all fixed up. So Spider-Man's like, cool, man, because I'm basically in tatters. My costume's ripped all to pieces. We'll go to this machine, we'll put our brain in there, we'll see what's happening. Now, more recently, in Deadpool's Secret Wars, which is actually really cool, Deadpool sent him to the wrong location, sent him to a different device, and this is not the one that he was supposed to use. If you look at Deadpool's Secret Wars, kind of a funny little retcon that basically Deadpool was there the whole time. But when Peter Parker uses this, suddenly just kind of like this little orb basically appears out of nowhere. And when it does, he picks it up and then it immediately starts bonding itself, sort of graphing along his arm all the way to his full body, and dons him with a brand new costume. But before we can find out what actually happens here, Charles Xavier immediately hits the panic button. And the reason why is because Galactus is now in the process of activating his machine, meaning Galactus is getting ready to consume, destroy Battleworld, and everybody on it. Okay, so we are continuing our discussion on Secret Wars. We are picking up with part 5, so the conclusion comes tomorrow, which is actually gonna be kind of cool. Here's a funny thing. I was looking through the comments of the last video, and people were like, Spider-Man doesn't become Venom in this thing. He's just wearing the Venom symbiote. Which is kind of interesting. My thought process is, if the symbiote bonds itself to Spider-Man, and then leaves Spider-Man and bonds itself to Eddie Brock, and starts calling itself Venom, it was always Venom. So Spider-Man became Venom. I guess at that point, you're really just kind of arguing for the sake of arguing, but nonetheless, it's interesting, right? It's one of those funny little things. It seemed like people were splitting hairs in the comments, and I was like, it's all the same thing. So in the last video, we basically ended off with Galactus finally activating his world-consuming machine, right? And beginning the process of basically starting to like consume the world. And this is one of the crazy things because the heroes' lives literally rest on the shoulders of their ability to defeat Galactus here. And one of the funny things, this is one of the things we've talked about so far, is that Galactus has kind of been gearing up to do this for a while. And that's one of the things to bear in mind when it comes to Galactus preparing to consume a world in Marvel Comics, is it doesn't happen like that, right? It takes time. Like, it takes a while for him to start gathering his energies and to basically start, consolidating all of his machinery and then activating the machinery and then kind of going at it. Now, the funny thing about this, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, is that Galactus doesn't really need the machinery per se, but it does help. Because of that, when the various heroes start trying to slow down Galactus and start facing off against him, one of the things he does is he sends out what they refer to as a fly swatter, right? Now, this is just one of the many devices he has on his world ship that basically allows him to deal with various foes. Now, at the end of the day, and this is one of the things to understand here, at the end of the day, Galactus is just keeping them at bay. That's really all it is, right? It's just kind of a way to just sort of keep them busy with something else while he's able to do his own thing. The truth of this is that if Galactus wanted to, he would just kill everybody here, right? He would just wave his hand and just like disperse their atoms across the cosmos, or do any number of things to just kill all the heroes who were here. The biggest question to ask here is, why hasn't Galactus done that yet? And we'll actually find out what it is here in a little bit, because that's kind of the on-running question that a lot of you guys have been asking in the comments, and it is one that does get answered here. But for the most part, a lot of people are kind of musing this situation, really sort of analyzing and looking at the situation, right? The X-Men are the first ones to really answer the call and jump into the conflict. Again, if you guys recall, Captain America's forces traveled to the base of Doctor Doom, and the X-Men traveled to the village where they were basically keeping an eye on Galactus. And so with the ship activating, this fly swatting device is basically destroyed. But when that happens, it sets off this massive atomic explosion, right? This huge amount of energy is dispersed in a very, very small window, and ultimately it creates this nuclear explosion that seems to kill all of the X-Men. And so when that goes down, the Avengers, of course, or I guess really Earth superheroes, but the Avengers, for lack of a better word, all basically end up responding and jumping into the fray. But while they're on their way there, the Incredible Hulk, various other people are really sort of analyzing the conflict they're about to get into, right? Because they're going to fight Galactus, and this is not a small thing, right? Like, going to fight a person who could just destroy you with a wave of his hand really begs the question, what's even the point? What's even the point of the various superheroes facing off against Galactus? There's no way they could possibly win. But at the end of the day, they are superheroes, and their job is to try to both keep themselves alive and protect innocents. In this instance, the various people in the village, but really more to keep themselves alive than anything else. And so it's one of these funny kind of questions, because once the various superheroes get there, along with Reed Richards, suddenly Galactus teleports the world-destroying device away and takes Reed Richards with him. And when this happens, you get something that you don't really get very often. And this is one of the reasons why, if you go and you read like Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four, there's a lot of conversation that goes on between Galactus and Reed Richards. When you go and you read some of the stories, even outside of Jonathan Hickman's run, where it deals with Galactus and it deals with Reed, you see them talking to each other in a way that nobody else does, right? Now, Reed does understand the nature of respect. Being brought to the ship of Galactus and being permitted to speak to Galactus himself, that's something that Reed kind of takes very humbly, right? So he basically says, I'm honored to be acknowledged by Galactus. And it's one of these things where it's like, you could just destroy us, but you're taking time from killing us, basically, to have a conversation with me. Thanks, thanks, bro. That's really kind of what it comes down to, but he asks, would you like to view your home? And Reed says yes, and then Galactus says, here you go. And he shows him what's going on in his home with Susan Storm, who's basically pregnant with Valeria Richards, hence the reason why she's not here right now, why She-Hulk took her place. You've got Franklin Richards there. Here's what your family's doing at the moment. And then in turn, Galactus says, listen to what it is that I have to tell you, because what I'm about to tell you is exceedingly important. And then we switch. And then we jump to Doctor Doom, who basically breaks out of his facility. And Doctor Doom comes to the realization that the world ship of Galactus is the key to it all. And in order to access the world ship of Galactus, in order to do what it is that he needs to do, he ends up taking Ulysses Claw. Now, if you recall, we talked about in one of the previous videos, Ulysses Claw, after he had been absorbed by Dazzler and then dispersed onto the ship of Galactus, he was basically sound resonating through the ship itself, right? So he knows the ship inside and out, but that's not what's important here. What's important here is that Ulysses Claw resonates at the frequency of that ship, right? So for those of you guys who are really familiar with DC Comics, who are familiar with the Flash, and the Flash like vibrates, you know, from one universe to the next. If the main DC universe is in the key of A, right, like going with musical notes, if it's in the key of A, and then like Earth 2 is in the key of C, then the Flash needs to vibrate at the key of C in order to access that universe. That's the only way he can get in. Ulysses Claw is the exact same way. For all intents and purposes, he's basically Galactus' ship in human form, or at least one portion of it. And so what it means is that by having Ulysses Claw here, in effect, Doctor Doom has a portion of Galactus' ship here. And that's what he's just realized, right? That's the conclusion that he just came to. And that's why it's kind of important, because from there, what you start getting into is Reed basically showing back up and talking to everybody and basically saying that as far as Galactus is concerned, that Reed is kind of this you know, universal champion of life, right? That he's a force of nature just like Galactus is. Now, something to understand here is that it's not as though Reed has been imbued with the power cosmic or become a herald of Galactus or anything along those lines, but this is important. And the reason for this comes in really two major events. The first one is the original Galactus trilogy when he first showed up in Marvel Comics, right? And the idea was that Reed, or really the Watcher with Johnny Storm and Reed, had basically, you know, managed to attain the ultimate nullifier and was really threatening to like destroy Galactus, right? So it was like, I'm willing to destroy a universal constant, right? A force of the universe in order to protect life. The next thing that came after that was the trial of Reed Richards. And the trial of Reed Richards actually came out about 5 months before Secret Wars started. It came out in January of 1984, with Secret Wars coming out, you know, starting in May. So with the trial of Reed Richards, it established the idea that Reed was actually put on trial by the universe, by various races, for the fact that he essentially saved the life of Galactus and doomed untold billions of people to death, with Galactus going through and consuming their worlds. But the response of Reed is he has to exist, right? He has to exist in that capacity. He's a universal force. So not only did Reed do what he needed to in order to save the Earth, but Reed's also an explorer of the universe, right? He explores the universe and even the multiverse, various other dimensions, different things along those lines, right? Transcending the existing universe, going to dimensions, going to the negative zone, different things along those lines. And so with that being the case, Galactus sees him as an individual who really is kind of the precipice of what humanity can achieve, that in time, all of humanity will be on the level of Reed Richards, in the sense that they're explorers. They get out there and they look at things across the cosmos, and they're champions of life. This is a pretty significant moment for Reed. But at the end of the day, and it's one of these interesting scenarios, at the end of the day, Reed basically sanctions the attack on Galactus. And the reason for that is because Reed just wants to get home, really. I mean, that's literally what he says. You know, when the question is asked, like, what about Galactus? You know, I thought that you weren't certain about the idea of attacking him. At least that's what Captain America asks. And, you know, basically Reed says, like, I just really want to get home. And so Galactus initially starts to turn the conflict and looks directly at the superheroes and with the intention of kind of facing off against them. But it's one of these funny things, because when this whole conflict is going on, initially the heroes start attacking the world-destroying machine of Galactus. But the response of Reed is, no, do not attack that. Find some way to subdue Galactus. And when the question's asked why, of course, Galactus takes off, and Reed's response is because he doesn't need the machine to do this. What's going to happen here is Galactus is going to go back to his ship. Galactus is going to consume his ship, essentially consume all the energy within his ship. And then when that happens, he's going to come to Battle World. He's going to consume this world. We're not going to be able to stop him. He's probably going to consume the sun, and then he's probably going to go face off against the Beyonder. So all you guys have done is hasten how fast we're going to die. That's all you've really done here. And that's what makes this so crazy, because from that point, you jump directly over to Doctor Doom. And what Doctor Doom has been doing is literally cutting Claw into pieces, which is kind of messed up when you think about it, but it's kind of a big moment, because when that happens, what we end up finding out is that what Doctor Doom has been doing, when Galactus goes to consume his ship, he goes to consume the entirety of his world ship, that what Doctor Doom was doing by realizing that essentially Ulysses Claw was an extension of Galactus' ship, that if Galactus' ship holds all that energy, that's where it gets stored whenever he consumes things, then instead, what Doctor Doom has done done is he's basically split Ulysses' claw into parts and turned it into a kind of a series of siphoning tubes built out of the same thing that is essentially Galactus' ship. And when that happens, he basically siphons the power cosmic off instead of Galactus. So what ends up happening is that when Galactus starts the process of consuming his world ship, instead of the energy traveling directly into him, all the energy literally flies across the world and then travels into Doctor Doom. And Doctor Doom takes all the power of Galactus. Now, the funny thing about this is that when that happens, Monica Rambeau as Captain Marvel is basically sent over there to investigate. And the reason for this is because no one can really see, or no one could really watch everything go down, given the bright lights, the vast amount of energy, different things like that. But Monica Rambeau is really like a pure light being, right? We saw that both in terms of this story as well as what was established in Al Ewing's Ultimates. And so with that being the case, so you can essentially watch all this go down. Well, what it does is it allows Xavier to create a telepathic link between Monica Rambeau and Reed Richards. So Reed can basically see through her eyes without physically having to worry about his eyes being damaged. And what we end up getting here, and this is a cool thing, we get Doctor Doom experiencing the power cosmic for the very first time. Now, for those of you guys who read Infinity Gauntlet and who read the instance where the Collector had the Reality Stone but didn't realize the full potential of its power, when Thanos took it and then used it to start warping reality around Collector, the Collector started to lose his mind because he couldn't really comprehend how reality was being altered beyond his understanding. And that's what's going on here with Doctor Doom. The Doctor Doom is experiencing the power cosmic in ways that he's never experienced before. He's never had this kind of power. And that matters because this is like spending your life driving a vehicle that has like 108 horsepower, right? Like some Mini Cooper or something like that. You smash the gas pedal and it's like, that's it. But then suddenly you get behind like a Challenger Hellcat. You tap that gas pedal and it's like, you just go flying. It's a whole new level of power that Doom's never experienced, right? So his subconscious can really manifest all these crazy things. The smallest thought, I wish everyone would die, they would all basically die. He has to control his thoughts and his own mind in a way that he's never had to before, lest the power cosmic basically drive him insane and destroy everything in existence, right? So it's a crazy level of power. Now, this is him experiencing this and almost kind of going awry, but Doctor Doom also has an exceedingly high level of intelligence, and that's what allows him to basically overcome the insanity that almost anybody else would endure by taking the power of Galactus and then using it for their own ends. And so what you end up getting is the Avengers and the X-Men basically rallying together, Magneto using his powers in one of the coolest moments to basically lift their ship up and then fly it. But then you also get this really cool argument between Captain America and Wolverine. And this is one of the things that we've talked about before, right? And this is where the seeds of events like Avengers versus X-Men get planted and come to fruition, you know, some 40 years later or something like that. Because what goes on is that Magneto using his power almost kind of unsettles Captain America insofar as the grandiose nature of how his powers can be used, right? The fact that Magneto can do this and he's not really breaking a sweat. Now, in terms of a kind of discussion of why it unsettles Captain America is Magneto sort of says, is it because of my powers? Because I'm just so ridiculously powerful? Is it because I'm a mutant that you're not at ease? What's the reason behind this? And Captain America's response is because of all the evil schemes that you've committed over the course of your life. And then immediately Wolverine jumps in and Wolverine says, but here's the thing, man. Like, here's the thing, Captain America. What's going on here is you're talking about a guy that, yes, has committed some pretty heinous acts, but they were terrible acts with a noble purpose. At the end of the day, when it comes to us as mutants, we cannot count on you. Like, we cannot count on you, Captain America. Like, you stand for truth and you stand for justice and you stand for liberty and all that kind of cool stuff, but it only applies to humans. When was the last time you ever came to the side of the X-Men when the Friends of Humanity or the Right or any one of those groups were coming after us? When was the last time that you showed up on our doorstep when humans wanted to kill us and you wanted to give us a helping hand? That's never happened. You've never really come to the aid of the X-Men. You fight for freedom in the world, but you only fight for the side of humanity. You don't fight for mutants. You don't fight for anybody else. And so before you start going out and calling Magneto some kind of a crazy terrorist, maybe you should look at the bigger picture. Now, of course, Captain America responds by saying, well, there really is no justification for terrorism and murder. And this is a really cool response. Wolverine says terrorists, that's what the big armies call the little armies. That's really what it is, right? The big armies call the little armies terrorists, you know, but at the end of the day, it really all just depends on what you're fighting for, right? It depends on what your cause is. That's the difference between a person who does terrible things and a person who does great things. It's all just based on your motivations. And sometimes the ends really do justify the means, right? But it's kind of a funny thing because in response to this, Doctor Doom basically looking at everything that's going on, you know, kind of jumping back to his character, looking at everything that's going on, kind of has this discussion with Ulysses Claw. And initially Ulysses Claw is like, you already have so much power anyway with the power cosmic, why aren't you satisfied with where you're at? And the response of Doom is, I cannot rest if I know that I'm only ever second best. And that right there perfectly signifies the nature of Doctor Doom. That Doctor Doom always looks to acquire absolute power. It's insatiable, right? That was one of the big points of Hickman's Fantastic Four, is that when they were going around the multiverse and they were grabbing every version of Doctor Doom that tried to acquire absolute power and then basically lobotomized him more or less and stuck him below the Citadel. You know, when Reed Richards of the main Marvel Universe asked, why are you doing this? The response of the Council of Reeds is, because the desire for power for Doctor Doom is unquenchable. He will never have enough. He'll never be satisfied. It's just kind of the nature of his character, is how he functions. And so in response to this, Doctor Doom does the only thing he can do. He immediately goes after the Beyonder, like literally goes and faces the guy head on. And it gets kind of nuts because from that point going forward, Reed Richards basically uses a tractor beam to grab the body of Galactus and bring him back down to Battle World while everybody's kind of dealing with the aftershocks. So there's what seems to be this massive battle that's going on between Doctor Doom and the Beyonder. And the crazy thing about this is really just kind of the Beyonder using his power to just sort of blast Doctor Doom, right? To almost push him away. It's not really the Beyonder using the full totality of its power to just destroy him. It's just kind of trying to push him away, right? Because one of the things it says is, stop, you cannot approach me, right? And the crazy thing about this is that with Doctor Doom, he's overwhelmed immediately. It's nuts how vast the power of the Beyonder is in comparison to like the power of Galactus, in the sense that Doctor Doom bit off way more than he could chew. You know, despite all this crazy power that he has that previously belonged to Galactus, he is still no match seemingly to overcome the power of the Beyonder. And that's what's nuts about that, because what he does is he kind of launches this gambit and he basically approaches the superheroes in this kind of energy form of himself and says, look, I'm trying to destroy the Beyonder so we can save ourselves, and then I will basically grant power to individuals who are looking to achieve a noble purpose, basically espousing the same thing the Beyonder did, but putting off this guise of like, I'm trying to save us all so that none of us die. Now, the truth of the Avengers and the Fantastic Four in looking at this is they immediately know that he's full of crap. They immediately know that the whole goal of Doctor Doom is to take the Beyonder's power. But what he does is he reaches out to the various superheroes and says, lend me your power, lend me your abilities, and then in turn, I will channel them, I will use them, and then I'll destroy the Beyonder. The day will be saved, and I'll give you guys whatever power you need to achieve your own individual goals. Now, Magneto initially starts to bargain, like initially, like right off the bat, goes and runs to Doctor Doom, but then stops himself all of a sudden. But before anybody realizes that he stopped himself, you've got Iron Man and Hawkeye that jump in, and they're just like, no, man, subdue this guy, man, like get this guy down, you know. Now, of course, with that being the case, Doctor Doom basically just sort of leaves, you know, and he's back there facing off against the Beyonder and is just almost completely and totally obliterated, right? He's not dead, but he's almost completely and totally obliterated. And so what the Beyonder does is it becomes curious. And this is an important thing. The Beyonder gets curious about Doctor Doom. And so it basically takes his body and starts scanning his memories, right? Starts looking through his mind and gets the entire history of Doctor Doom and his entire origin, right? Everything that led up to like the death of his mother, ultimately selling her soul to Mephisto. And then you get everything that you basically see in Doctor Doom, Doctor Strange, Triumph and Torment, or maybe it's the other way around in terms of the title. But essentially, like, it starts to pull his armor off. It starts to analyze his body. It basically kind of dissects him in and out, not in a physical sense, right? It doesn't really chop him up or anything like that, but it starts to sort of look at him and say, what's this guy about? And so before we find out what actually happens, what ends up going on is suddenly there's this massive kind of earthquake. And then once all the heroes are basically able to get out of the buildings, right, just kind of run for their lives, the various villains flee as well, then suddenly there's a massive light in the sky. And when they look up, essentially Doctor Doom is like this colossal being who's like hundreds of feet tall, as tall as Galactus was, and then immediately shrinks down to a smaller version and says, let there be peace here. Understand, I'm not here to fight you guys, right? I've killed the Beyonder, I stole his power, there is no more enemy anymore. Everything is copacetic and everything is fine. This conflict is done, this is it. I am now absolutely God. Okay, so we are continuing on with Secret Wars 1984. We are in the conclusion. We are at the end of this story. And it's been fun, right? It's been fun covering Secret Wars. I really enjoyed covering this story because Secret Wars I think is pretty solid. In this point, like we immediately pick up with Doctor Doom with the power of the Beyonder. And it's kind of funny because as soon as he sort of manifests, right? As soon as he shows up to the heroes like he did at the end of the last comic, basically what he throws out here is the Beyonder's dead and all the power that he had now belongs to me. I could destroy all of you with a single thought, which is probably what you expect me to do. And it's like, okay, why would you open up with that phrase though? Why would you open up with that statement? And here's the funny thing about this, right? This is what's so interesting about this. The heroes are debating whether or not they should attack. For all the good that this would do, it'd be like ants launching an attack against Galactus. It's just kind of funny, right? Like what hope could these heroes possibly have against the various villains who are here right now? One of the big things that kind of takes place simultaneously where the heroes are sort of debating what to do with Doctor Doom is you have the Molecule Man Owen Reed. Reese. Now, this is one of the most important parts of the story, right? Because this sets the stage for Owen going forward, not just in the immediate aftermath of Secret Wars, right? Because some of the things that were done here were eliminated almost right off the bat, right? Either they were eliminated in really short order, or they took a little bit of time, but they basically came to an end, right? Not a whole lot of things that came out of this lasted the long term and are like still going on in Marvel Comics. But with the Molecule Man, it definitely is, or at least it was until Secret Wars 3, the unofficial Secret Wars story from Fantastic Four. But the way this plays out is that the Molecule Man, like a lot of the other villains, believe that Doctor Doom is basically betraying them, right? Now the truth, and what they always kind of knew, was that this was really Doctor Doom's plan, right? The plan of Doom was to steal the power of the Beyonder. It was always that way, or at least to kill the Beyonder and take its power, according to Doom. That was the plan in which he had always been intending to implement. He just now got around to it. But the funny thing is, what ends up happening is a Molecule Man uses his powers to basically shift the heroes away, right? To literally take this chunk of rocket that they're on and shift them away to a different location, and then immediately goes to attack Doctor Doom. And as soon as that happens, like the Molecule Man's like, I can control anything that's not a living molecule, so like your suit of armor, different things like that. And so because that, Doom's like, you're a lot more powerful than you think, let me show you. And what he does is immediately grab Owen Reese. And what he reveals to him, and again, this is a hugely important thing, what he reveals is that the Molecule Man has the ability to manipulate all molecules. There's no limit, right? Living molecules, molecules that are not living, there's no difference there. He can manipulate them all. Now again, it's not molecules, it's essentially subatomic matter is what the Molecule Man is controlling. But again, you know, subatomic man doesn't really sound doesn't really roll off the tongue the same way Molecule Man does. But nonetheless, basically what he tells Owen Reese is that your limits on your power are not due to the nature of your power, right? Your power doesn't have any actual limit. You can control everything throughout the entirety of the universe and even the multiverse if you chose to, right? Like your power transcends pretty much every other source of power out there with the exception of mine. Now, this is an important thing because this does include Galactus, right? Owen Reese is more powerful than Galactus. Doom basically says the limits on your power are because you're afraid. You have this self-hate, you have this fear of your powers. Let's strip all that away, and basically removes these subconscious mental blocks that Owen Reese had in his mind. And when that happens, Owen Reese's powers basically amplify, right? So it's like when Gohan went mystic for the first time, basically like he's just sitting with like old man Kai, like old Kai, and then Gohan freaks out, flares up, and his power is just like insane. So that's kind of what's going on here. The mental blocks of Owen Reese have been removed. There are now no limits to Owen's power. And this comes to fruition when he literally manifests a kind of yacht of sorts out of nowhere, and then they just go flying back to a base of operations. And so what they end up doing, or at least what Owen does, is he sends them all the way back to Denver, Colorado. Now remember, Denver is one of the many places that have basically been collected into Battleworld, right? So these people are here with no earthly clue how it was that they got here. But of course, they end up going to the apartment of Marsha. And it's kind of this funny moment, right? Because there's one point where Marsha's talking to Owen, and he's like, well, you know, we got to get out of here now. And she's like, we can go back to my place. And it's just kind of like, okay. All right, Marsha, I see what you're doing. But nonetheless, it's kind of cool, right? Because when this goes down, they kind of start having these conversations, and they're like, we're already back in Denver, Colorado. Just send us home. Just like send us back to our residence. Because in reality, with the Beyonder's power having been taken by Dr. Doom, the contest is essentially over. The force field that was basically keeping them out of keeping them from battle or leaving Battleworld is essentially gone now, right? They can leave anytime they want to. But the biggest issue here is now you have Dr. Doom with godly power, right? Dr. Doom has become God. What do you do about that, right? What's Dr. Doom going to do with that power? That's the concern here. And so what you start to see is Owen Reese basically create this kind of bubble by manipulating subatomic matter, create this bubble over Denver, and then just like yank it out of Battleworld and basically start sending it on its way. And so that's when things get kind of nuts, because from there you basically shift over to the Incredible Hulk and Colossus. Now for Colossus, it's weird, man, right? Because Colossus has this great big huge thing, like this huge love interest going on with like Zazie. He's known this girl for like 4 days, right? So with Kitty Pryde, he's known that girl for years, right? I mean, they've been well, maybe not years, but like for a long time, right? And he's like, yeah, man, this girl, like she's my girlfriend, like we've known each other for a really long time, but like I just met this chick though, and I've known her for like 3 days, so like I'm in love now. And it's like, okay, Colossus, so basically you've never been with a girl before is what everybody's kind of assuming here, because it's really what it looks like, right? This guy's brand new to the world. But for the Incredible Hulk, he basically just kind of lying, you know, sort of just laying there, kind of collecting himself, and is suddenly hit by a blast of energy. And when that happens, he kind of just starts lumbering along in an almost sleepwalking comatose state. Now, of course, Julia Carpenter tries to jump in to basically slow him down. It's kind of be like, you know, I don't know where this guy's going, but we got to keep him contained. And then the energy basically passes from the Incredible Hulk into Julia Carpenter, and then she goes all the way back, or goes to where Ulysses Claw is, and then seems to go there for the purpose of either grabbing him or something along those lines. And then a giant light kind of emits out of nowhere, which seems to snap her out of it, right? And so at that point, we end up finding out that Dr. Doom had kind of visited the location. He'd basically reconstituted Ulysses Claw and then restored Monica Rambeau back to her normal form, back to her human form, and then took off back to his citadel, right? Left like a giant note for everybody, like, you know, you're summoned to the Tower of Doom at dusk tomorrow, you know, and it's like, okay, you know, whatever. But it's kind of cool because from there you jump to Colossus, right? Colossus taking off to go see Sazi. Like, he basically approaches her in the middle of the night, gives her flowers, you know, really kind of shows some affection. This is kind of a big thing here. In reality, I'm not 100% sure why this was a plot point, because if that was the case, I guess maybe Jim Shooter was toying with the idea of having Colossus leave Kitty Pryde, but it kind of seemed unnecessary and just sort of out in the middle of nowhere, right? And one of the things that sort of chimed in by Wolverine, and it's kind of the answer that Jim Shooter gives us, is that the reality is this seems to be some kind of side effect of her healing properties, right? Like, she's been healing Colossus and Colossus fell in love with her. That kind of seems to have been the case. And it's interesting because Wolverine kind of offers this explanation to Nightcrawler, like, how does her race interpret love, right? They're from a whole different race, they're a whole different culture. When it comes to this character of Zazie, it may be one of these things where for her, love is no different than breathing or something along those lines. It's not really a relevant thing. Now, the fact that she shows affection the way that she does shows that love really seems to be something important, but for her, love and friendship may very well be the same thing, right? There really is no differentiation there. And so ultimately what this means is that Colossus is probably stuck in the friend zone. Good luck getting off that ladder, man. And so as a result of that, the various heroes end up showing up to Dr. Doom's citadel. Now, this is hugely important. And the reason for this is because Dr. Doom basically says, you know, tells these various guys, I've committed a bunch of evil deeds in my time that I've been here on Battleworld, and even before the point that I came to Battleworld. So we're going to rectify this, right? We're going to fix this, and we're basically going to take care of this. The first thing I'm going to do is reconstitute Kane the Conqueror, who Dr. Doom had incinerated before. And then the second thing is I'm going to send him back to his time, right? He's going to go back to his future. From here, I will give you guys any wish that you ask, right? I'll give you guys whatever it is that you want. And this is a really, really cool thing, because what this does is it gives the impression that Dr. Doom is being somewhat benevolent, right? He's basically a good guy now, turned over a new leaf. But the heroes don't really trust him. And there's an important reason for that. And we'll get why here in a second, because it's not just the idea that Doom has been a bad guy, right? They could look at this and say, with this newfound power, good and evil are irrelevant to Doom, right? It's just him carrying out what he believes to be the right thing. They end up turning him down, right? They end up saying, we don't want to have anything to do with your power or whatever. And then Doom's response is, fine, then leave. And if you guys come back, I'm going to kill you, right? So with Julia Carpenter basically being missing when the group, you know, comes back together again, Captain America kind of sneaks back in and ultimately ends up coming across the path of Doom, right? Now, Doom doesn't kill him. We never really expected him to. And instead, what you get here is a really cool conversation, right? One of the things that takes place is Ulysses Klaue is tasked with tracking down Julia Carpenter for Captain America. And then when that happens, Julia Carpenter ends up grabbing him, and basically the energy passes from her into him. And then he just kind of goes forward accordingly, showing back up to Dr. Doom himself. And of course, we'll find out what's going on with that. But there's this really cool conversation where Doom basically explains what his plan is, the grandiose scheme behind why it is that he attained or looked to attain the power of the Beyonder in the first place. The intention of Doom, as it's always been with trying to attain absolute power, both with this story, the stories before this, is to travel to the realm of Mephisto and free his mother's soul. That's always been the intention of Doom. And so the result of that is that Captain America and Doom find a bit of camaraderie, right? They've both lost something significant. Captain America lost his past, Dr. Doom lost his mom, but the difference is how they approach it. Doom talks about how he doesn't really care about the goings on of humanity, and really says, like, me ruling over Earth, ruling over this universe in this capacity, it would be like you ruling over a droplet of water with amoeba inside, right? Like, of what use would it be to you? Why would you care about what that amoeba is doing? It's irrelevant to you because this life form is so much lower than yours. That's how Doom kind of perceives things. But notice this, Doom is still showing some very human emotions, meaning that Doom isn't that far from being human in the first place, right? He's not really as far removed from his humanity as he would like to believe. And so from there, you end up switching over to Colossus making out with Zazie, so obviously he's not in the friend zone. And then here comes Charles Xavier blocking, like, Colossus is with his chick, and then Xavier's like, Colossus. In response, like literally, Colossus is like, go away, Professor. And he's like, no, man, I'm sorry, dude. I know you're trying to get your groove on. You need to show up here. This is an emergency. This is a very important thing. And so what this does is it goes into why it is that the superheroes still don't really trust Doom despite his claims that he's so far removed from humanity. Captain America asks, do we really believe that Doom is a good guy? Do we really believe he's a great guy? And then he chimes in and says, remember, what's the first thing Dr. Doom did with his newfound power? And the response of Reed Richards is, he fixed his face. And what that means is that Dr. Doom is still wholly human. Despite the vast amount of power that he has, the first thing he did was worry about himself. That was the first thing he did, right? A being that is as benevolent as Doom claims to be, right? A being that's as far removed from humanity and really wants to do good, do right by the world, wouldn't focus on themselves. You don't really care about people if you only ever focus on yourself, right? That's the illusion of the narcissist. And so the result of this is that they all really kind of chime in and say, yes, at the end of the day, we can't really trust Doom here. So then they start asking the question, what do we do? Like, do we attack? And for the most part, all of them really kind of chime in and really kind of go alongside Captain America. Yeah, let's attack this guy, let's do this guy in. The only one who's really kind of on the outside here is Colossus. And the response of Colossus is like, but what has he ever really done to us though? Like, sure, he's a bad guy and he's done some bad things, but so is Magneto. Magneto's done some pretty horrible things. We still have him on our team. And at the same time, Doom has basically said, I will give you guys things, you know, I will do things to make your life better. He may never, ever harm us. And if that's the case, if we go and we attack him first, despite the fact that he's actually done nothing to us, then yeah, it's a preemptive strike. It's a just in case, like, hey, we're gonna attack you just in case you decide you want to harm us. The response of Captain America is, that may very well be right, but that's why we're doing in a unanimous vote. Everybody has to vote yes. If anybody here votes no, we do not attack. We do not strike. And this is kind of an important thing, right? Because Captain America is aware of the stakes of the situation. He literally says, it could very well be that we get struck by a bolt of lightning from the sky. Doom like is watching this whole thing go down, and if we all vote yes, we're dead, right? It'll happen that fast. And ultimately Colossus says, yeah, that may very well be the case, but we have to do that. Yes, I say we fight. And at that moment, a bolt of lightning comes down from the sky and kills them all. Every single superhero dies. Man, I tell you what, if we were not doing a conclusion, if I wanted to extend this by one video, I would leave you on that cliffhanger. I'd be like, with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. I think it'd be pretty amazing. Like, it'd be pretty hilarious. But of course, it ends up being Doom who was the one who did this and was actually watching it all go down. Now, this is an important theme that goes on here, because Ulysses Klaue watching all this take place is really just kind of like, oh, did you really do it? Did you kill them? And Doom's like, yes, I really kind of had to. Now, it's interesting because one of the things that Doom says is he has to keep that power bottled up inside of him, right? If he lets loose, if he lets his guard down, if he shows a moment of vulnerability, then ultimately he'll lose all that power. It'll escape his body, and who knows what could happen. The slightest drop in concentration, the slightest lapse in focus could lead to the ruin of the entire universe. And in reality, given what we know about the Beyonder now, the entirety of the multiverse, right? It could all come crashing down because Doom lost focus, because he fell asleep or something along those lines. It's a huge weight to carry. And so what you end up doing is picking up with Enchantress. And this is kind of important because you sort of get into why the Beyonder did what he did in the first place. And so you pick up with Enchantress back in Marsha's apartment, again, kind of in Denver, floating out there in space. And she starts talking to one of the elementals, to a water elemental. And it's really just kind of like, what have you heard? But what she basically says is that like the Beyonder is this being that exists out in some space called the Beyondverse. The entire space that makes up the universe, for lack of a better word, that the Beyonder occupies, Beyonder was one in himself unto it, right? So it was like if the universe had sentience. So think Eternity from Marvel Comics, and that's what the Beyonder was. He was everything in that space. And when he had essentially looked into the main Marvel universe, that what he had seen is that individual beings had desire. And they had desire because they were unsatisfied. They desired power, they desired women, they desired men, they desired money, they desired, companionship, they desired all manner of different things. But they had these desires because they didn't have them, right? It's the thing they want because they don't currently have it. And some emotional or biological need drives them to want that thing. And so seeing individuals who were essentially incomplete really intrigued him, right? It made him curious about the various characters in the main Marvel universe. And so the idea of the Beyonder is, if desire is what drives people, then how far will they go to achieve those desires? How far will they go for that? And so that's why he basically abducted the various heroes and various villains and then brought them all here. And that's why he said, slay your enemies and all you desire will be yours. What are you willing to do? What is it that you're going to ask for? That's really kind of the big thing. That was what the Beyonder was sort of looking to get into. Now, ultimately, this led to Dr. Doom initiating his plan and then entering into the realm of the Beyonder using the power of Galactus, and then in turn, stealing the power of the Beyonder. Now, this is a very important thing because the question's asked by Enchantress, is the Beyonder dead? And the response to the Elemental is no. The Beyonder is still alive, but it's hiding out. It's basically too weak to really affect anything or to attack Doom. And so it's basically just biding its time and waiting for a moment when it can steal its power back, right? So Doom's statement of destroying the Beyonder, of killing the Beyonder, is false. The Beyonder's been defeated and its power has been taken, but at the moment, it's still very much alive as an entity that's out there. It's just vastly depowered, right? It's much weaker than it would normally be. And so in this moment of what appears to be vulnerability with Dr. Doom, when he's essentially falling asleep, Ulysses Klaue, who's the current host of the Beyonder's energy, right? That's what's been happening. The Beyonder's energy traveled into the Incredible Hulk and then left the Incredible Hulk, went to Julia Carpenter, and then traveled from Julia Carpenter into Ulysses Klaue. In this moment of vulnerability, the Beyonder covets its power and it seeks to take it back. But Dr. Doom immediately wakes up. Now, he doesn't know that Ulysses Klaue is currently the home of the Beyonder, right? Where the Beyonder is residing in his subconscious. He just simply believed that, falling asleep, that things could run awry, right? Now, here's the interesting thing about this. This this is what's so intriguing, is given this vast amount of power, technically speaking, Doctor Doom doesn't need to sleep, right? He can sustain himself with infinite amount of energy, so he never really needs to sleep. The difference here, and the reason why this matters, is because Doctor Doom has not yet changed his body, essentially, right? Like converted his body into like a pure form of energy, because he doesn't really fully know how to comprehend or even control these powers, right? They're still brand new to him. With all the vast sorceress abilities at his disposal, at the end of the day, it pales in comparison to the power he has now, and even the power he had with Galactus. This is an infinite amount of power. Now, something else that I do want to kind of chime in here, I want to chime in with a difference between what this shows us with the Beyonder and what Jonathan Hickman did. Jonathan Hickman changed a lot of what the Beyonder was when he did Avengers and New Avengers. At the time this story was written, and at the time that Secret Wars 2 happened, that was basically it, right? It was just the Beyonder, and there was really nothing more to it than that. Now, Secret Wars 3 in that Fantastic Four story would change some things, and we've got multiple videos on the Molecule Man, the Beyonder, different things like that. So, you know, I'll link those down in the description, or at least my editor will, if you guys want to see this, or if you want to see those. But the overall gist is that at the time this story was written, yes, this is the first time the Beyonder's introduced. The Beyonder makes it all up, right? Now, given what we've seen over the years, the way the Beyonder actually functioned is initially following this. The Beyondverse was this space that was vastly, it was infinite in size, right? It dwarfed the size of the multiverse, right? The multiverse was like a drop in the bucket in comparison to the size of the Beyondverse, right? It was colossal. But what we've seen over the years is the introduction of the Beyonders, right? The idea that the Beyonder was simply a member of a singular race that was called the Beyonders. Now, that was introduced, I believe, in the Secret Wars 3 Fantastic Four story, right? The unofficial conclusion that basically revealed that the Beyonder, the reason why he exists here is because when Owen Reese experienced his accident that basically gave him his powers, that he had unwittingly opened up a portal to the Beyondverse, right? And normally that's how cosmic cubes are created, right? You open up a portal to the Beyondverse, the energy comes out, and then it goes into some kind of a stasis cube, which is known as the cosmic cube, right? The overall gist is that in this, part of the Beyonder's energy had basically emanated out into the universe, and the other part of the energy went into Owen Reese, right? So essentially that changed the origin that we got in this story. But the overall gist, or the idea behind this, was that the Beyonder, of course, went through all the steps that you're basically seeing here. The important thing, what Hickman established, is that the Beyonder, as you see him in this moment, is really more of like a child. And that's why, while the Beyonder's power is vastly infinite, while it is insane in scale, it is in a lot of ways dwarfed by the power of the other Beyonders, right? The Beyonders that we saw in Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. Their power is far more grand in scope than the power that you're seeing here that Doctor Doom is wielding. But the fact that Doctor Doom was able to wield the power of the Beyonder in this story is why it was that he became God King Doom during Secret Wars that Jonathan Hickman wrote in 2015. He was basically reattaining a power he was already relatively familiar with, even if it was only more powerful than what he had experienced in this particular story. You know, hopefully that makes sense, but it's kind of an important little caveat, right? What ends up happening is the question of really Ulysses Klaue kind of starts to manipulate Doctor Doom, right? He basically starts saying things like, if this power is so grand, then what about your subconscious, right? What keeps your subconscious from manifesting things, you know? And starts to kind of put in this idea of like, well, maybe the heroes are actually alive, right? Like maybe you killed the heroes, but if you really wanted to kill them, you would have disintegrated them, but you just blew them up. So maybe you didn't really want them to die. You know, when Doctor Doom kind of starts to question this, it's like, well, let me show you what's going on out there, right? You know, the Ulysses Klaue is like, let me show you what's most likely taking place or something along those lines, and gives a hologram where basically Sazi goes running over to where it is that Colossus and them are at, where the explosion took place, and then finds kind of the tattered remains of everyone. The only person she's really able to resurrect is Colossus. The issue is that it takes the last of her life force in order to do it, and so of course Sazi ends up dying. But in the aftermath of that, Colossus takes the body of Reed Richards, which is one of the only ones that could survive the explosion because of his elastic nature, resurrects Reed Richards. And then following that, Reed Richards goes through and just starts using the machinery, the medical machinery, which essentially healed and revived him, and then starts basically repairing and healing all the other heroes. And it's kind of a funny thing here because Jim Shooter sort of messes with us, because the idea is that the kind of conversation that's going on here is where Ulysses Klaue says this is a possible scenario, that's what's going on right now. You know, at the end of the day, Doom's like, well, if I believe you, then like I could will that into fruition, right? I could ultimately resurrect those heroes, not really intending to, but my subconscious would do it because it would want them to be alive. But it's kind of toying with these things, you know, it's sort of Ulysses Klaue manipulating and toying with Doctor Doom. You didn't actually want to kill the heroes. If you did want to kill the heroes, you would have atomized them, right? That would have been it. They would have been destroyed and nothing more would have come out of that. It's one of these interesting moments because in response to that, where Doom's like, no, they're dead, right? Like I killed them, they are absolutely dead. Suddenly a hammer comes flying in, right? Like Thor's hammer comes flying into the Citadel, and then Doom momentarily loses control of his powers and destroys a planet in the process, right? And so he manages to contain them back down again, but then Ulysses Klaue reaches out and says, give me a portion of your power and I can in turn go and defeat the heroes hero so that you can rest and you can reconsolidate your powers back into yourself. And so what you end up getting, and this is one of the things that people are talking about when people say like critics didn't really like the story, with this, like you kind of see this sort of cartoony element coming out, right? And so far as like all these massive monsters are basically spawned by Ulysses Claw, and then in turn, they all end up facing off against the heroes. Now, for the most part, Ultron is resurrected as well, and Ultron is basically made to face off against the heroes, but in the middle of the whole thing, Ultron basically explodes, right? And then here comes Wasp seemingly out of nowhere, exiting the body of Ultron, and basically offers this explanation of, she had essentially gotten into Ultron's body and just started yanking wires and made Ultron explode. So following that, Captain America takes out Ulysses Claw and then goes to confront Doctor Doom. Now, here's where things get hairy, right, in this part of the story, and here's where Jim Shooter doesn't really offer a definitive explanation in terms of what's going on. And the reason for that is that when Captain America gets in and confronts Doctor Doom destroys Captain America, right? He atomizes him. Well, then suddenly Captain America pops back up again, and then Doctor Doom atomizes Captain America, and then Captain America keeps popping back up, right? And ultimately gets the upper hand on Doom, and then Doom really kind of starts to freak out as his power goes awry. Now, while all that's going on, Ulysses Claw is watching the whole thing unfold. And the reason why this is important is because Jim Shooter can go one of both ways here. Either it's Ulysses Claw with this fraction of the Beyonder's power, fraction of the power that he got from Doctor Doom, constantly resurrecting Captain America, bringing him back, and then really sort of kind of establishing this sort of vulnerability in Doctor Doom. The other alternative is that it's Doctor Doom's own subconscious, right? He doesn't really want to kill Captain America, but he is killing Captain America, so he just subconsciously keeps resurrecting him, right? It can go either way in this particular discussion. That's one of the reasons why it's so wild. And that's why it's kind of interesting, because it's not like a moment of like Ulysses Claw saying, yes, me resurrecting Captain America and ultimately resulting in Doctor Doom losing confidence in himself is going exactly as I had planned. It doesn't really work that way. You don't really see anything that on the nose. And so in that moment, because of the fact that Doom is experiencing this moment of vulnerability, this is the moment where Ulysses Claw strikes, where the Beyonder basically reaches into Doctor Doom, takes his power back, and then that's basically it, right? He forces Doctor Doom back into his current form. He sends Doctor Doom to the future, right? Because Doctor Doom had actually come from the future at the time this story kicked off. I think it was Fantastic Four 228. It's kind of where it picks back up again, but he ends up getting yanked back into the future. Ulysses Claw is, of course, out of the picture, and essentially the entire conflict is over, right? The Beyonder has essentially vanished, right? Has basically disappeared and gone back to whatever it is that he does, which you actually find out in Secret Wars 2. But for the other superheroes at that point, it's the question of what do we do next, right? It's really a little bit of R&R. It's everybody kind of collecting themselves, getting themselves back together again, and then just sort of like, what's the next thing that we do? Now, what you also get is kind of a cool explanation here, in the sense that you end up having Captain America traveling off to the side, when there's this sort of speculation about different things happening across the planet, but it wasn't really done by Doctor Doom, it wasn't really done by the Molecule Man, it just kind of seemed to happen, right? Ben Grimm, for example, reverting back into his human form and then going back into his stone form. And Reed Richards sort of surmises that given the nature of the planet, that basically it's some kind of residual energy that essentially grants the will or grants the wishes of various individuals if their desire is strong enough, right? If their will is strong enough. And that's how you kind of got explanations of things like, we need a base of operations, suddenly there's a base of operations there, right? We need food, suddenly there's food. We need water, suddenly there's water, different things like that. The planet basically manifests things for them, presumably because of what the Beyonder's done or some aspect of the Beyonder's energy permeating the planet. And so Captain America, of course, reforms his shield, but this matters. This little plot point, this little idea of the planet basically catering to the desires of those who occupy it is significant, because Reed Richards essentially uses a teleporting device to send the various heroes back to the ships that they arrived in, and then in turn intends to send the ships back to Earth and then take them wherever they need to go and, basically drop them off. But the reason why this is important is because what ends up happening is She-Hulk ends up traveling with the Fantastic Four to move away from Susan Storm's position and to replace Ben Grimm on the team. And the reason why is because Ben Grimm is staying behind. And the reason for this is because Ben Grimm wants to basically figure out how to control his power. Ben Grimm can kind of switch back and forth, but it's not necessarily a hardline thing. Now, the reality of this is that this has been speculated for a long time by Reed Richards that Ben Grimm could always do this, right? He always had the ability to alternate between his stone and his human form, but for whatever reason, simply wasn't able to do it, right? Either because of how he viewed himself, some kind of mental block or something along those lines, but never really was able to achieve that ability. And so because of the fact that he can alternate back and forth, and because of the fact that Ben wants to kind of master and learn how to achieve this, what he basically ends up doing is staying behind. Now, this basically picks up in the Thing solo series, right? The Thing solo series actually started back in 1983 and ran for 36 issues. It ran for a little while, right? But it basically kind of continues on in that little bit of a story, and then ultimately he's kind of resigned back to his own individual, to his own stone form, and just really can't seem to return again, right? It's a hallmark of his character. It's kind of the way he's always been, and ultimately ends up going back to the Fantastic Four. But basically the story ends that way, right? Ben just kind of sitting on a rock by himself, and it's just kind of like, let's see where this journey takes me. But yeah, I enjoyed this story, right? It's a classic story, right? So most modern fans won't really care, but I always thought it was kind of a cool story, an interesting one to cover. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you all hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.